welcome to today's show, where I've been herding cats trying to get all of these guys together and ready to discuss something at the same time. And we are going to review, first off, Danny's appearance on Piers Morgan, where he's talking to Andrew Wilson and Jay Dyer, but also a review of that by Apostate Prophet and David Wood, where they're kind of providing commentary, being quite insulting to Danny, raising some philosophical points that, we have some questions about, and being much more sympathetic to Jay Dyer and Andrew Wilson's positions than we think that they should be. Maybe before we get into that, though, just to say, Danny Phil Talks over here, check out his channel. Detroit Friction down here, check out his channel. Philosophy Interviews and Things. Lance Bush, Lance Independent down here, check out his channel as well. Everyone here has an academic background in philosophy. We've all studied philosophy. Lance has got a PhD. Do you have a PhD, Detroit? Are you in philosophy, or? But
mine's in psychology. I have a master's in philosophy.
Master's in philosophy. You have a university background in philosophy, right, Detroit? Yeah, and you, Danny, as well. So just to argue from authority, against.
Yeah, we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, just a quick thing about the psychology thing. That might be a little misleading. I do philosophy and psychology. I publish in both. I do interdisciplinary work.
Yeah. Awesome. So first thing we want to do then is look at some of these engagements on the Piers Morgan show and unpack those. So do you want to share your screen, Danny? And we can go through some of these clips. You're muted, by the way, as well.
Yeah, I am sharing it right now. So a little bit about background here. This was a complete shit show. If you like that kind of thing, then maybe watch it. But there was, what are you going to do on Piers Morgan, right? Are you going to get through all the minutia of these distinctions and solve the problems of philosophy? No, right? This was a complete shit show, but a bit of philosophical stuff did shine through, and I think we're going to highlight two clips here. We have Jay Dyer here, right, who is saying silly stuff, and I press him on it. But keep in mind that Piers Morgan the last thing he wants to do is talk about philosophy. He just wants a shit show. So we'll play the clip then, I guess, everyone, and then we'll briefly discuss it, and then we'll look at the second clip, and then we'll look at Apostate Prophets and David Wood's take on it. So are we ready?
Yeah.
Sounds good. In the sexual domain, which there's no basis in their worldview for anything to be morally, objectively right or wrong, other than their personal preferences. So if there's nothing objectively wrong, there's no reason why bigotry is wrong. Why is bigotry wrong?
Well, support your claim. Don't run from your claim. Support it, right? You're saying we as atheists have no basis of morality. Support that.
Yeah, no epistemic basis for getting an ought from an is.
Yeah, that's a claim. Okay, well, you're saying atheists
No, it's an argument. It's a famous argument.
Right? You're saying that atheists can't account for morality. So what's the argument for that?
You can't get an ought from an is the argument. Back to Hume.
It looks like you don't know what an argument is. Come on, reason. Try to go from one line of reasoning to another. Do you know what an argument is?
You cannot get an ought from an is. You're an atheist. In a materialistic worldview, there's no ought.
What does that have to do with atheism?
In a materialistic, atheistic worldview, there are no oughts.
First of all, I'm not a materialist.
You don't know the basic problem of ought from
claim. That's just another claim.
Not a claim, it's an argument. It's a famous historical.
Look,
you don't know the difference between a claim and an argument.
Claim, you can't defend it.
It's an argument. It goes back to David Hume.
Can you tell us what an argument is?
You didn't even know that.
Right.
You don't know the difference between.
Look what just happened. Look what just happened. This guy said.
What just happened is that you didn't know the difference between an argument and a claim.
Why are you over talking to me? Why are you scared? Let me talk, right? You just claimed that atheists don't have a foundation of morality. I asked you to defend it. And then you said, you can't get an ought from an is. What the heck?
That's the argument. That's
where are you going to get from that premise, right? You can't derive that.
It's an argument. It's not a premise. It goes back to David Hume. You just didn't know that.
Okay, can we get I think we're moving.
All right. So there, Piers saves Jay Dyer. Now, before we get commentary on this, let's look at what Hume said here. I guess what Jay Dyer is saying is that atheists have this special problem that we cannot go from is to ought. So they can, apparently, we can't. And therefore, we can't ground morality or explain it or whatever. So This is, I believe, is in book 3. This is in the Treatise of Human Nature, book 3, section 1, paragraph 27, I believe. And here's what Hume says. In every system of morality which I've hitherto met with, I have always remarked that the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary way of reasoning, and establishes the being of God, or makes observation concerning human affairs, when of a sudden I'm surprised to find that instead of the usual copulations of propositions is and is not, I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought or an ought not. So does anybody want to comment on that, and then link it back to Jay Dyer's, I guess, claims?
Yeah. So sorry. And Troy, I'm getting feedback through my
Shouldn't be from me. I don't.
If you and I'll run.
We're having audio issues.
Yeah, somebody's giving feedback or something.
Okay, well, I'm gonna mute.
It might be you on your. If you
Danny, you're the only one that's
It's gotta be Danny.
You're muted. Oh no. I think it's on. Okay, I've muted your screen audio. That's it. Figured it out. Right, when we're not playing the clips, screen audio, that's the issue. Yeah, so what I was gonna say is, it's not, I mean, Jay made a whole bunch of claims there, so I put some of them in the private chat as it was playing, and maybe we can go through a whole bunch of those. This claim about, well, the first thing to say, right, about this is-ought distinction, he doesn't actually make an argument. He refers to a distinction, right, that Hume makes, and he hints at the idea that there might be an argument there, but he doesn't provide the argument, and that's what you're pressing him on, of course, right? You're trying to get him to support that claim and to make clear what the tension is supposed to be. So, as Hume is pointing out, it seems like, you're not basically deductively going to get an ought claim from is claims. I mean, that's almost just a point of deductive logic. Like, unless you've got some kind of premise or some statement that has a normative claim in, you're not going to get it from merely, descriptive claims, right? So, I mean, that can be true, that distinction, but that doesn't tell you anything about whether or not that's consistent with atheism or with theism, or inconsistent with atheism or theism, without some further stated premise, right? Or some kind of thing that hasn't been mentioned. So, I mean, there's much more I could say about it, but yeah, Jay just hasn't made the case about why that's inconsistent with atheism.
And when you're looking at the specific quote, he's not only talking about how, when we talk about human affairs, let's say people don't have money, I don't know, and then people infer from that, oh, therefore, we should do X, Y, Z, right? He's also talking about sort of descriptivist claims about, or descriptive claims about God, and then finding ourselves with ought or ought not, when Hume is saying that we can only go as far as saying, making propositions concerning what is or is not. So the irony here is that if you're looking at Hume, right, he's actually cutting against certain divine or theological ethics, where you're deriving descriptive claims about God to these normative claims about what we should or shouldn't do. That's the irony of this.
So it's like, if Jay's argument, I mean, Jay doesn't say what his argument is, but if his argument is something like, atheism entails that the only statements that are true are like a set of is statements, right? But if that were the case, then you couldn't derive any ought statements, but there are ought statements, therefore atheism is false, right? Something like that. Well, then there's a parity here between that and theism, because theism as a hypothesis can be cashed out as just a series of is statements about God and his nature and so forth, right? And then if that's all you've got in your theory, then you wouldn't get any ought claims without some kind of like additional normative or evaluative claim that's embedded within that theory. Now, you could say, of course, there will be theisms that will say that, but if we're being fair to theists in that way, then let's be fair to atheists and let them cash out if they've got, normative claims in their theories as well.
Yeah, note he did this weird, switch into atheistic materialism, as if that was what you were talking about in the first place. As if like, oh, it's an objection to atheism, but no atheistic materialism. Like, what? I don't know. Just seemed like a weird switch. And then he didn't really respond when he said, I'm not even a materialist.
All right. Yeah, he didn't respond to that. I'm not a materialist. Danny's not a materialist. What about the Nathan and Friction? Are you materialists?
So not really, but probably people who affirm materialism would not disagree with me, but I don't call myself a materialist.
I think I call myself a materialist sometimes only to make a distinction against certain other philosophical views, but I don't have some like some particularly rigid theory, right, of what that means. It's more of like, for me, a classification of distinction. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to make a few comments on it. I mean, first of all, did you notice that he just threw the word epistemic in there right at the beginning? Was that doing any work at all, or was it just, hey, let's throw a technical term in here because it sounds philosophical? Like that epistemic doesn't have anything in particular to do with like a deductive syllogism or something. What is he doing with that? So
well, that was the other thing, right? Because they often do the switch between, this is a common precept thing too, right? Well, they'll do this argument that atheism is both incompatible with certain truths, but then they'll say, no, it's not that it's incompatible with them, it's that you can't justify them or like know them on atheism or something like that.
So he might have been alluding to that. But, you know, there's a few other problems. Just historically speaking, this was not an argument that was like the context in which he's presenting it made it seem like this was an argument that historically speaking was used to present a distinctive problem for atheists, or at least atheist materialists. That is absolutely not true. And yet the context made it seem like he was drawing on this well-established argument. And I mean, one, this is not an argument. It's like an observation Hume was making. Two, it completely generalizes to logic in general. It has nothing particularly to do with normative and descriptive claims. So like, what does it have to do with the context of this sort of thing? And then he had the audacity to say, and I caught, if you go back, you'll see him saying this. He said something like, you didn't know the difference between an argument and a claim. So he does this thing that I'm sorry to be harsh, but it's the kind of thing that is very childish to do, which is like, if someone lied and they're like, no, you're a liar. And it's like, no, but I didn't even say anything. How could I be a liar? So he's just accusing you of the thing you're accusing him of, just to like say, no, but you, when you weren't presenting an argument, that doesn't make any sense. So like, it's just very strange things that he's saying here. I mean, then you have the obvious thing that atheism is not materialism. The other thing that you shouldn't let slip past you is a few times he implies that you can't say, or you can't hold that things are wrong if you can't say they're objectively wrong. That's not true. What if you're a constructivist? What if you're a relativist? So it's just, I don't know how long the clip was, but the amount of errors in that clip, it's like very dense.
It was mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling.
How could you make that many mistakes in like 30
I was actually surprised. There was one, I was like taken back at some point, like, oh my gosh. And by the way, if you're a Jay Dyer fan, if you're one of the a fanboy, Jay Dyer takes you to be a fool, right? He knows, right, that people like you won't care, right? Will overlook all these issues. He takes his audience for fools, right? If you just stop and actually check what he's saying, right, whether the line of reasoning kind of follows or gets to his conclusion that he wants, it will not check out. And he depends on you not doing that, right? Jay Dyer thinks that his audience is so stupid that he can get away with what he wants, right? That's you, Mr. Jay Dyer fan.
Well, and then a final point I want to make about this is that if you're an atheist, and let's say you're a naturalist, and you call yourself a materialist or a physicalist or something like that, the most common realist position among philosophers currently, like contemporary analytic philosophers, is naturalist realism. It's not non-naturalist realism. If you look at the 2020 Phil Paper survey, it's about 33% endorse naturalist realism, and only 26.6% endorse non-naturalist realism. And most of the philosophers that endorse moral realism are atheists. Now, the naturalist realist, depending on the type of naturalism in question, wouldn't have much of a problem dealing with, you know, quote unquote, deriving it from it is in a certain sense, which is that on a naturalist view, it's possible to reduce ought claims to a type of descriptive claim. Now, you still wouldn't want to throw in a syllogism like unreduced ought claims and have a problem there, but they could easily construct arguments that would be a argument for some moral fact that would in principle be reducible to a set of descriptive claims where the conclusion still has an is, but technically it's a moral claim. So naturalist realists, if anything, would have an advantage with this quote unquote problem. This would be particularly a problem if you were trying to draw conclusions about the truth of irreducibly normative claims from a set of purely descriptive premises. But that really isn't even a problem for a non-naturalist realist, whether a theist or a secular moral realist, because you just don't have to do that. They could just include some irreducibly normative claim in the premises. That's not a problem. So this is not a problem for anybody other than somebody that like doesn't understand basic logic. But that's not like an individual's confusion about basic logic poses no distinctive problem to any particular position on moral realism or deriving normative claims. And also, finally, this is only about drawing normative claims. That has nothing to do with moral realism. And that, you know, if you peel back all the layers, this has nothing to do with moral realism in particular, because normative claims don't require moral realism. It's not like anti-realists can't make normative claims. What if you're a moral relativist? What if you're a constructivist? So if you get rid of all of the 73 other problems that we pointed out, this still wouldn't work. It's complete nonsense.
So I just want to mention, you know, if you think of the ratio of what like Jay said there, right, to how much time it's taken us to unpack and go through what he said. I mean, one of the points that you made was basically how Jay tries to kind of like frame what he's doing often in terms of these sort of these historical narratives. And this is a common, his argumentative strategy is often to, instead of being clear, you know, people have been waiting for him to give a formalism of his tag argument for upwards of 10 years now, and I'm not even sure if he's done it yet. You know, he often just goes on these kind of like detours through pseudo history where he mentions references to lots of people's names and facts and says, you know, this is what since the Cappadocian fathers they've been talking this way. And those kind of detours are often historically questionable, but they don't really support even the points that he's making. It's not clear what the inferences are supposed to be. But this is kind of the problem, right? Is that Jay just does this. The optics are very good because he's very confident in asserting these things. And then it takes a bunch of time to carefully unpack what's going wrong with what he's saying. And then in a scenario like this with the audience, it's like, well, that will now look bad because it's like, well, actually, we need to just slow down and be careful about what's being said. But we can't do that because, you know, Jay's like, yeah, there we go. We've won. We've seen the atheist shattered, folded like a chair. And, you know, it's just frustrating.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next clip if we're all good. Does anybody want to?
Yeah.
Contribute?
Well, I just was trying to say quick to sort of sum my thoughts on that issue is that, look, obviously this problem or this inference or this point that Hume made is not originally or standardly been taken to be some problem for atheism or atheist materialism. If he thinks that it is a special problem there, then he could try to make that argument. But just throwing out the ought from is and just saying it's a problem is not doing that. It's just kind of ridiculous. So that's sort of where I'd leave on that.
Yeah.
All right.
And on this point, if people are interested, this paper, Logic and the Autonomy of Ethics by Charles R. Pidgeon, he basically argues or makes the point that, yeah, it's a category distinction between, you know, two things. And insofar as there is an is or problem, right, there's like a hedgehog fact, non-hedgehog fact problem. It's just two different categories of things. And the question of how you explain both of those different types of things is just independent of, you know, the observation that these are two different like categories that you can't derive from one another or something like that.
All right. Ready for the next clip?
Yeah. I'm trying to add your thing back. There we go.
Okay.
Oh,
case 2, right?
Wait, God having his particular view on morality is no different than me having my view because we're both subject.
The argument is that it's an objective
What is it, Jay? What is the
morality.
subject? Jay, what is the subject?
You're equivocating on the fact
What
that
is the
subject is making an argument versus the argument
do you
being
think objective
subjective.
No, you said
That's a philosophical category error.
Jay, I
This
asked
is
you
like
if it's
talking
true.
to children.
I asked you.
It's a category error, you idiot.
I gave you the youth throw dilemma. I asked you if it's true dependent upon a stance or independent of a stance. You said it's dependent upon God's stance. That's subjective by definition.
I said that the argument for Christian ethics is not a subjectivist ethic, and because God is a subject, it doesn't make the system subjective. That's an equivocation
What do you think
error
subjective
on your
means,
part.
Jay? What does subjective mean? What is subjective?
Purely
mean,
relative to the individual.
Okay, is God an individual?
True dependent upon a stance.
Is God an individual?
That doesn't mean that the ethic is subjective. It's
Just
an
answer the
objective
question.
ethic. You're
Is
just
God an
rephrasing.
individual?
You're substituting the word individual for subject.
I'm asking you if God is an individual.
you
Yes
did.
or no, Howard?
That doesn't mean that the ethics is subjective.
Yes
That's
or
a
no?
system and
Who's running now?
It's an
Is God an
epistemological
individual?
argument that's
Just answer the
different.
question.
From
Let me bring
Andrew.
Andrew, you.
And then Piers saves him again. Yeah, so by the way, there's a whole dialogue tree here. And I think there are moves that Jay could make. Of course, he's too stupid to know which move to make here. We'll probably, when we review the apostate prophet and David Wood stuff, I'll probably get into the Craig stuff then. But yeah, there might be a move that he could make, but it's again, it is a dialogue tree here. He doesn't make any of the right moves here. And I guess I would want y'all's comment before I go any further.
Just muting your audio as well, so on the video, so it doesn't echo. Yeah, I think the first thing, right, to do, and obviously, again, this is the wrong context for this type of conversation, is like, what is at stake with this subjective distinction? I think we'll probably unpack that a little bit more later. But my view on why, I don't even know why Jay and Andrew are so concerned about this. And I think it's because they view philosophy as a tool to shut the mouth of the unbeliever, to smack people over the head. And I think that stems actually from bad values. It's nothing to do with Christianity or atheism. That I think it's to do with not understanding the gospel of Jesus Christ about loving people and bringing them into the kingdom of God, and instead, having a thing about dominating people, which is very connected to some of their politics. But yeah, in terms of what they're saying about objectivity and subjectivity, if we were to be consistent with what Jay's saying, right, where he's saying, okay, the commands of God depend on his stance, right? They depend on what he said, but there's a fact of the matter about what he has commanded, and if you were to kind of apply that consistently and call that objective, right? That's the criteria for something to be objective. Well, that would mean that in the case of subjective theories like agent relativism or something like that, they would be objective too, because there is a fact of the matter, right, about what people have said they value or don't value. And so if the only criteria is that there is some fact of the matter de re about what someone has said they do or don't value, then agent relativism would satisfy that as well. So I just think that Jay is confused here about what he's saying.
Yeah. He said the subject is making an argument. I don't know what he was trying to say there, but if he's just saying that the fact that God is a subject doesn't by default make the system subjective. Okay, right, that's correct, because you might have a different view about how the truths of the moral facts are fixed, right? It might not be God's stances or something like that. But then explain that. What is it apart from God's stances or something like that fixes the moral facts? I don't know. Probably Lance has more to say about that. But.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more in a subsequent clip, and I kind of want to wait for that. But I'll just note again the thing at the beginning about him saying that's a category error. It really does look like he has like a list of philosophical terms to throw at people, like epistemic and category error, and he just like goes to the list and picks something. Like if I could just say, "Hey, Danny, that's a post hoc ergo propter hoc," so that's a fallacy. It really sounds like he's doing something like that to me. Because there were no category errors. If there was, he could say, this is the category, the thing you're describing belongs in some other category. There would be some explanation that would be forthcoming about that. Unless he felt so pressed for time, he thinks there's a category error that is going on and he's not able to explain it because he's flustered or something. But there wasn't. And so I wouldn't expect that explanation to amount to anything. But it is very frustrating for someone to have a technical vocabulary, but appear to not be able to use it competently. And that could mislead an audience into thinking that Danny didn't have a complete win here, which he did. And he also did in the previous clip. Someone that doesn't know better, this whole thing about this is an established argument for the is-ought thing, or in this case, that's a category error. To someone that doesn't know better, that could sound like he's landing a blow, and he's not. Because, back to the wall, I don't think he would be able to explain what the category error was, like the alleged category error. There wasn't one. This is just someone, throwing terminology at a wall and hoping it'll stick. I mean, unless if maybe he's doing that on, look, I don't understand his internal psychology of what's going on here. If he thinks these are actually good arguments, wow, is he misguided. But as far as the whole thing about, look, he wouldn't answer your question. So you're saying, is God an individual? And he said, he basically was saying, but that doesn't matter. Why not say yes, but that doesn't matter? Why can't you just say yes if the answer is yes? It's so frustrating when a person, the answer is yes, and they won't just say the words. And it should always raise a massive red flag about someone with respect to their intellectual integrity when they just won't say yes to a yes or no question. This was not a trick question you were asking. This was not some loaded question. This wasn't like, have you, stopped, doing drugs or whatever. This was not an inappropriate question for you to ask. And if it was, he easily could have said, that's not an appropriate question. That's a loaded question. There's a false dichotomy implicit in your question. He could have said that if it was. There wasn't anything inappropriate about the question. And so by saying, if someone says, hey, did you steal the cookies? And you say, but they were so good, you might as well be saying yes, right? So there was a pragmatic implication of what he was saying, which is that he was conceding tacitly to saying yes, but he just couldn't get himself to say yes. So if the answer was a no, or the answer was this is not an appropriate question, that could have been a move he made. He didn't make that move. He tacitly conceded to saying yes, but still wouldn't say it anyway. And that says a lot about someone when they just won't make an explicit concession. That's a totally legitimate one in the context of that particular segment of the discussion. And for them to be hostile and condescending and aggressive towards you when they're doing that kind of evasion, like in plain sight, it's really just super objectionable.
I want to replay part of this because there's something that I want everyone to catch what the evidence of him not being arguing in good faith. It's when
I'm asking you've got as an individual, yes or no, coward.
Yeah, right over here. He gives a definition of subjective as purely relative to the individual. So he brings up the term individual. Okay, we do not bring up that term. He does, right? So watch.
Okay,
so true dependent upon a stance.
Is God an individual?
That doesn't mean that the ethic is subjective. It's an objective ethic. You're just rephrasing. You're substituting the word individual for subject.
That's what he did. When I asked him what subjective was, or what it means, what a subject is in relation to subjectivist moral theories, right? He brought the word individual, so I'm asking him about that, and then he accused me of replacing the term individual with subject or vice versa. It's just crazy.
You were using his own terminology.
I was using his own terminology.
Yeah, you're being maximally fair in doing that.
And he would affirm that God is a subject too, right? So what difference does it make anyway? Like I don't know.
Subject or three. Yeah, and I think it's not just the evasion that's frustrating, right? It's what the evasion at the same time as then whenever you try to bring clarity, they're constantly kind of like slinging mud at you. They're like, you're arguing like an idiot, category error, fallacy. Like, and it's all, this is what's frustrating is that, they're very good, in quotes, with the optics of, they're just projecting like power and authority. And I think a lot of people in their audience, they eat that up because that's what the type of theology that they represent expresses, right? Is that there's this return to the trad west and all this, let's just ignore the nice bits in the gospel from Jesus. And that's what they do in these sorts of debates. They just kind of like sling mud at you. They don't clarify anything. And, if there are people who are sympathetic towards Christianity, who want to see, want people who are Christian scholars to look up to, right? There are plenty of people out there who will, be clear, charitable, graceful. They will concede points if someone points out an error. Don't look up to these guys.
Right. So, which brings us to the people that reviewed this. We have Tweedledee and Tweedledum, Apostate Prophet, and David Wood. So part of this is that I was in chat. I think even Nathan was in chat and Detroit was in chat at some point, right? They were reviewing this video and of course, making egregious errors, not trying to understand me. And I offered, right, to come up, to kind of clarify things. I'm going to play that clip first. And then let's see, that's going to be at 121. I believe 121. Here we go.
Also, maybe
what do you want to do?
Just before that, actually, there's a clip that could be good to put some context in as well. I think about 2313-ish, this is how they've been talking about you preceding this, right? Preceding going in as well.
So this is 21. You said 2113?
2313.
Okay, here we go.
It is good. Those are the only people who can like be completely fluent and have no accent in either language. I saw this, man, I knew this kid when I was young, and His mom was German. His dad was Italian, and he was
sorry, 2420, Danny.
Oh, 24. I thought I heard 20. I'm sorry. All right.
No,
yeah,
I misspoke.
like, and I was on a show and they wouldn't even let me on there.
What, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it goes before.
And then Cameron's got Trent Horn on with him, and Trent Horn's like, "What? How did it?" That's interesting. I mean, you'd think he would want to.
Oh, here we go.
His dad was Italian, and
No, I'm sorry, guys. I can barely.
And of course,
there we go.
Is Jordan Peterson a Christian?
You play like 5 seconds of a Jubilee clip. They're like, "Oh, copyright strike," and then you got to freaking fight it with them.
Calling him Jubilee.
From the Danny Phil Talk channel, Danny Shaw, and Parker from the Parker.
That's that kid who was trying to get on our show and we wouldn't let him. Remember that?
Yeah.
And then, hey, I don't know if you know, then he went over onto Cameron's channel the next day and he's like, and I was on a show and they wouldn't even let me on there.
What, really?
Yeah. And then Cameron's got Trent Horn on with him, and Trent Horn's like, "What? How dare they not let you on?"
Well, the funny thing is, when I made a video about this.
Okay, so a background. First of all, Cameron Bertuzzi did let me on because he isn't a spineless coward, at least in that moment he wasn't. What happened was Trent Doherty was misunderstanding who I was and what I was saying, so I requested to come up to clarify things. Now, for people that I've been in the YouTube scene not very long, but in the last 5 years, I think I have a viewer right now. His name is Answers in Atheism. Now, you know that I have a history of, hey, if I feel like I'm not being understood, if I feel like, oh, my camera is going weird. If I feel like I'm not being understood, I basically want to talk about it. It doesn't matter if there's one viewer or if there's 2,000 viewers, right? It's a pet peeve of mine when people are making criticisms of me and they're not understanding me. Okay. So it wasn't some kind of desperate move. I've only asked him one time before this clip to come up because they were reviewing my clip. I thought it would be interesting. Cameron Bertuzzi and Trent Doherty allowed me up, and it was a fine conversation, right? And by the way, there is background here. Inspiring Philosophy texted David Wood not to let me up. Of course, he's also a spineless coward that got humiliated by me. But so that's a little bit of background.
The debate with me last week as well. So
he dodged that debate as well, right? And there's a lot of people, a lot of invertebrates in this section of the internet, and so. Yeah, that's the bit of background. And they're saying that I was begging to come up. I mean, that's not what happened. I said, hey, if you want to know my perspective, I'll come up. And they said no. And then I left that alone. And then I did the same thing here when they were reviewing it. So is there another time?
I think here as well, if you just play for maybe like
continue
30 or so seconds more, just because, well, just pause it a sec. What I want to highlight to people as well is this kind of like power dynamic thing that's going on. Where I think from our point of view, right, obviously there's a degree to which we're all frustrated by this type of polemic that they're engaging in their review, that Andrew Wilson, Jay Dyer engaging in their reviews, but we're all very open to discussing these things with people who disagree with us, because it's the only way that we can find out if we're wrong, the only way for us to improve our views if we are wrong about something. There's no. Of course, there's like a blood sport debate type thing that a lot of people, and you've got to maybe be able to participate with that if you're going to be engaging with people who are very polemical. But I think for all of us, we also have exhibited clearly an interest and ability to engage in these topics, and that we will have respectful conversations with people who disagree. And I think that these guys are just not interested in that, but instead, they're here kind of like laughing at your attempts to reach out to them, laughing at the fact that they have this power to not give you a platform. And then, and then they're about to go on and say a few of the things that they're about to go on and say, right? It's all about kind of bullying, right? Which is very annoying.
Oh, so we're going to play 30 seconds more? Okay.
Guy, a kid and all that. And then people were saying, you're calling him a kid, but he's actually a 32-year-old philosophy teacher.
30? What? That Danny one?
Yeah.
He's 32 and a philosophy teacher?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That sucks, man.
That made it even worse for me. Because I call him kid because he clearly acts like and looks like and sounds like a kid.
Yeah, that's how he is in when he's teaching. Well, that's embarrassingly terrible.
Apparently he's a teacher and he's 32. What the heck? I don't know, man. I don't know if anyone.
Yeah, so they're shocked, right? I mean, I get the age thing, but it doesn't make a difference in their demeanor. In fact, and I don't even know where the clips are, but they start saying they feel sorry for my students, right? That, how did the society get in a way where like I'm teaching anyone, right? When they don't know anything, as we'll see. But anybody can we continue or no?
Yeah. Feel free to, if there's a point you want to jump to, then where you try to
so let's go to 121. And let's just let me know if y'all have seen something that 121.
And I just want to say as well, like in terms of, I feel that we are not doing that with them, right? Like we're not saying, oh, look, here's this thing about David Wood's background or how he looks or how Apostate Prophet looks. Therefore, don't listen to these guys. Therefore, what they have to say is wrong. Therefore, they're evil people or something. If we are going to criticize them morally, it's going to be based off of the content of what they say or the presentation, all these actions of, asymmetric power dynamics and things. And I just want people to kind of like see that there's a big difference there, right? They are not behaving well.
And not to say that those other sort of criticisms couldn't be made. We're just, it's not.
All right, ready?
Yeah.
Come on. Let me put it this way. Pierce, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But he always acts like, I don't like that. I don't like the drama and everyone arguing.
Look at this childish behavior. Y'all see this? Like, how old is this guy? Man, must be like
exactly
19.
Anyway, powerful.
So the problem is that these guys can't give an account
Christians. I called for you as Christians to be loving.
All they've
both
talked
of you did
about
not show loving.
You
don't
know what loving means. You don't even know what that means.
Let's not talk over each other because no one can ever hear. Jay.
Yeah. So earlier in the first section, when we talked about Peterson, we were talking about what was good for men.
Yeah.
And whether Tate was good or Peterson was good. And now we're talking about ethics in the sexual domain, which there's no basis in their worldview for anything to be morally, objectively right or wrong, other than their personal preferences. So if there's nothing objectively wrong, there's no reason why bigotry is wrong. Why is bigotry wrong?
Well, support your claim. Don't run from your claim. Support it. Right? We have you're saying we as atheists have no basis of morality. Support that.
Yeah. No epistemic basis for getting an ought from an is.
Yeah, that's a claim. Okay. Well, you're saying atheists.
No, it's an argument. It's a famous argument.
Right? You're saying that atheists can't account for morality. So what's the argument for that?
What do you mean? If you want to prove them wrong,
an ought from an is the argument. Back to Hume.
It looks like you don't know what an argument is. Come on, reason.
Did you just say you don't know what an argument is? Wait, yeah, okay, couple things. One, this is actually interesting.
Hold on a second. Hold on. Look at Jay.
One line of reasoning to another. So before they get into their very, very very bad take on what just happened, they're giggling at Jay mocking me when they were criticizing me for being a child. Right? The point is that they only reserve criticism for atheists that they don't like. Okay. They like Jay Dyer, right? Or at least, recently they did a video with him patching things up. I think they did have some kind of clash, but they patched things up. Now, so when Jay Dyer mocks my voice, right? It's funny and not childish. It's cool. It's sexy. It's funny, right? But if I did that, right? All right. Oh, it's childish. Oh, what is this 19-year-old teaching kids? It's just pathetic, you two. Right? Does anybody want to comment before I continue?
Just to say, that whole thing is sort of like, glass houses and throwing stones kind of thing, right? Their whole shtick here, they're dressed up. David Wood, I don't know why he's dressed like that. I don't know what the butt of the joke is, but they're just enjoying this power asymmetry, laughing at you being mocked. Like, a common comment, I don't know if they made this comment, but that I've seen from their fans is, these two soy boy gay theists is like as if that's got anything to do with the content of why you're wrong. And again, it's just not the type of behavior that I expect from Christians. Apostate Prophet is meant to be being baptized today, I believe. He may have been baptized.
They postponed it till the end of the year.
Right.
Which is probably a good thing because look at this behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Like I wouldn't say that this is behavior that's indicative of someone who wants to live in the way that Jesus taught, right? That's my view. Not that it's my position to make that kind of judgment, but this is not a good thing, right? Just kind of like sitting there bullying someone. I mean, even if you had like a stammer or a lisp, that's the sort of thing that people again comment on, as they say, oh, you know, these gay theists with their lisps or whatever. It's just irrelevant to the content of what you're saying, right? Are we trying to figure out what's true, or are we just trying to like make ourselves? Are we trying to beat someone down, right?
And I'm annoyed. Can you bring up? Maybe I'm misunderstanding you, Craig. Can you bring up Craig's comment? I'm annoyed. The Izot dilemma. Yeah, the Izot dilemma is an argument, but it presupposes that atheist is a materialist. If Danny is not one, it doesn't apply. Where are you getting this, Craig? Are you just making this shit up?
Well, just to maybe address, like we already addressed this, Craig. There isn't an is or dilemma, right? Like Hume makes a point about a conceptual distinction between is claims and ought claims. You can't derive ought claims from is claims. If there's some further argument someone makes that is a dilemma, right, to do with atheism, then feel free to point us to that argument. Jay did not make an argument in the form of a dilemma. He simply asserted that there is this thing called the is-ought argument, and that means that ought claims are inconsistent with atheism. There are no premises given in favor of that.
Right, and remember...
Yeah, go ahead. Can we just explain what an argument is and what premises are and what a conclusion is so that people can stop with this? Look.
Well, you do it because Detroit doesn't know what an argument is. So
actually, I think Detroit would be the best person to explain this.
Well, I'm sure if you want.
Yeah.
It's just an argument roughly is a series of statements that you use along with some sort of inference or consequence relations to drive some conclusion. Roughly speaking, you can talk about deductive arguments, inductive, whatever. And well, I don't know if you want me to say more on that, but just to say specifically about Craig Reed said here in the chat. Look, as I said earlier, the is-ought point is not standardly taken to be a dilemma or a problem for atheism or atheistic materialism. Not originally, certainly. If somebody else, or Jay in particular, thinks there's an argument to be made there, then he could lay it out. But just throwing out is-ought dilemma is not doing that. And just it's just kind of ridiculous in context. But I don't know if there's something more anyone wants to say.
For the record, Craig has always been respectful to me, but don't do this to me, Craig. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So just that there's a difference between a set of claims that are intended to support or lead to a conclusion and one of the claims within that set. And so if someone says there is an is-ought problem or something like that, that is a claim. So that it would be like like maybe that could be a premise, but here this is someone claiming that there is an argument, and so that's not quite the same thing as like the premise of an argument. It's just someone saying there is an argument for this. But saying that there is an argument is not an argument. An argument would be like if you said, "Hey, premise 1, premise 2, therefore conclusion." That is an argument. So just saying there is an argument isn't explaining, presenting, or employing the argument. So if he wanted to say just, hey, here's this argument out there, how would that might be fine. But what exactly is the argument? Because just saying you can't derive an ought from an is just a claim. It's not an argument. And I think everybody would just agree that you can't derive an ought from an is in the sense that Hume intended. That's a trivial point to make. It made sense in the context in which Hume was making it. So it's not like Hume was saying something trivial, but just generalizing that as some sort of like problem. Who is that a problem for? Well, that would be a problem for anybody that's trying to draw a conclusion that includes content that isn't included somewhere in the premises. That's all that would be a problem for. Like atheists and atheist materialists aren't saddled with that problem because that would be a problem of the form that particular arguments would take. It would have nothing to do with the positions that atheists take, unless atheists were somehow obligated to like rely on invalid arguments or something. That would be a very weird position to take. Nobody thinks that. Hume certainly didn't think that. I doubt there's ever been a single person that has looked at what Hume said there and said, oh, wow, this is a serious problem for atheists. Atheists, who as we know are materialists, are stuck insisting that there are irreducibly normative claims that are derived from a set of purely descriptive claims. Wow, atheists are screwed. No one in the history of anything has ever thought that. And if they did, it would be a profoundly silly thing for them to think.
I think there's just one distinction here that could help people who are sympathetic. Maybe like obviously it's unclear what Jay's saying because he hasn't made an argument, right? But maybe his idea is something like, if atheism is true, you know, there's a series of is claims, and then everything else about the world has to be derived logically from those, right, or something like that. I mean, first off, that's potentially a mistake. You know, atheism is, philosophically at least, is simply, you know, the position that God does not exist or no gods exist, something like that, right? So that's consistent with Platonism, Aristotelianism, even maybe, you know, the existence of like demonic entities or, you know, weird interdimensional beings or whatever the hell, right? It's just, as long as none of those things are gods, atheism can be true. Now, maybe there are some specific types of reductive physicalism that might make a claim something like that. It's not even clear that they would, right? So for some forms of reductive physicalism, they would say that sort of everything that happens is derivable from some kind of laws about reductive microphysics or something. Whatever the most fundamental layer of reality is, some kind of microphysics, everything about reality can be derived from those. Now, the reason that I still even don't think these views, unless there's some claim about linguistic derivation or something, the reason I don't think these views are undermined by these like is-ought claims are, well, firstly, someone could become like an ought eliminativist or something, but secondly, because I think it just confuses logical derivation with something like reduction relations or ontological reduction or grounding relations. So that is to say, the question is, there are these sentences that contain ought claims or normative claims. What grounds those, or what do they reduce to, right? And it could be the case that they reduce to material stuff, you know, wholly material stuff, or that they don't reduce to God stuff, right? They could reduce to Platonic forms or propositions or something like that, Phrygian senses, who knows? The point would be that as long as they don't reduce to God stuff, you have a theory that grounds the existence of normative claims and thus metaphysically explains them without making, you know, without having to appeal to God. And then you just want to turn the tables around and say, you know, now for your theory that includes theism, how does that look? Because it's not been spelled out. How do ought claims, like for example, if I say, you know, I should put the bins out later, right? And that's quite plausibly true. Like I shouldn't just, you know, litter and be disgusting or something. If that's true, what relationship does that have to some stance that God has, or some, you know, some like commandment that God gave to Moses, or anything that the Bible has to say about anything? Like what's the rival theory on Christian theism supposed to be here that plausibly grounds my sentence there and makes it, you know, the case that there's a norm? How is there even an explanation that's not remotely insane to begin with? So yeah.
All right, we're good. Let's get through this.
Jay is actually fun. Dude, I had no clue. Every time I've ever seen him in some little clip, he's like dead serious. So I thought that's how he was.
Looks like you have a child sense of humor. Maybe mature up some there, David.
Anyway, so this is actually an interesting topic, but if we all know why Jay would say you have no foundation for your claims in your worldview. What?
Yeah, we all know it, guys. We all know it. It's kind of like linked to your criticisms, Lance, about, oh, it's obvious, or, you know, everyone has these intuitions. Like we all know, you know, it's a manipulation tactic. You know.
We know kind of what's required for a moral obligation, unless you think that something way less significant can explain why you have a moral obligation. Like if you wanted to say, oh, society tells you that you have a moral, unless you're talking about that, but that's not going to be what Jay or Andrew would regard as a moral obligation or something like that. And so if you wanted to respond to that, you would just have to say, and it's good that Danny has a background in philosophy, it should just be, no, I have this as a moral foundation for my claim that bigotry is wrong or something like that. But it's just weird. It's just weird to say you have nothing in your worldview that accounts for morality. Oh yeah, prove that there's nothing in my worldview that accounts for morality. Well, no, if I'm wrong, then you have to say what it is, because I don't know what it could be. So he could say it like that. I have.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, the one thing I want to say, and this is something that apologists always do, is so David, let me just restate what I take David Wood's argument to be, right? It's like, there's this question, what grounds morality? And that's sort of what I was hinting at before. I was talking about grounding explanations, right? Which again is a different point from logical derivation. So it completely avoids this is-ought problem. So it's confused to kind of think the is-ought problem is related to begin with. Problem, it's not a problem. Is to say, David seems to be saying, here's this question, what grounds morality? And so can you provide, atheism is wrong because you can't produce a simple noun that is your grounding explanation, right? That seems to be the entirety of the argument. Like, you might have to say a few more sentences than just a simple word. Now, if you wanted to, if that argument is true, then you can just turn around and say nature grounds morality, right? There you go. You've got your, and obviously, I think people will say, well, that's not very satisfying at all. You've not explained it. I don't understand anything more about, like, what's the relationship supposed to be between nature? And it's like, yes, great point. Absolutely brilliant, right? You're right. But the requirement was supposed to be that you can just say a word, right, that answers this. Now, if you want an explanation, we're going to have to get into some details, and there's going to be this parity there between the case of God, because this is what apologists often do, is they will say, but we have a word, God, and that does it. And now you go, well, okay, how? Like, how is that? You've just said a word, but how is that word explaining it? Like, what are the commitments here? What's the relation supposed to be? And they won't do that. They just think the fact that they've got a noun means that they've kind of done their job.
Well, Detroit, what were you going to say?
Yeah, two things quickly. First, I think by grounding, he doesn't mean in the like metaphysical. I think he's talking about some like epistemically here. But anyway, look, if he recall Jay's original claim, or one of the claims he made, was that you can't have or you cannot justify moral claims on atheism or atheistic materialism. And so it's perfectly fine for Danny to ask why I think that's the case. Support the claim that you can't have this on atheism or atheistic materialism. And then when they go over, these guys come back and say, oh no, that like they can't ask Jay to justify that. They have to present what they think explains it or grounds it or justifies it on their view. That's just missing the dialectic. It just seems like just a silly reply.
Yeah, and he should know, maybe he doesn't know Jay's background, but anybody that knows Jay's shtick, right? He doesn't just say, oh, I don't know what a potential theory of morality or whatever metaethical view could work on atheism. Could maybe you know one and you could tell me? That is not Jay Dyer, right? Jay Dyer makes claims all the time that he's the only one with this ortho account, Eastern Orthodox account of God, that can account for these things like moral values and duties. And he says that any other view, including the atheistic view, they just can't offer such an explanation or grounding or whatever, right? So, and then he likes to shift, right? So he's what Wood is doing is basically endorsing a burden shift here, right? Which is just not proper debate etiquette, at least.
Also, this is where, though, I actually think that I agree he could be making this epistemic claim, right, or raising it as an epistemic question. But here's why I'm not interpreting him as doing that, or if I am interpreting him as doing that, I think he's just raising problems for his own view, right? Because the reason he thinks his theory is to be preferred is because he thinks that God ontologically grounds these things. But the epistemic question of how do you know that you have these like normative, how do you know that the norms are this way rather than that way or something, right? I mean, that question is going to be the exact same for his view. It's going to be like, oh, well, I have these kind of like feelings. I read what the Bible says, but I have to interpret it myself. And it just degenerates into all of the standard like epistemic problems of, okay, so like, what is it about reading sentences on a page in the Bible that's translated to you through thousands of years that connects that to some attitude that God has, right? Versus, which is going to be the same question for what is it about this norm that your culture taught you, or this feeling that you have that means that it should be that way? Like, how do you know how do you know you've got the right one rather than the wrong one? These epistemic questions, there's just a complete symmetry and parity between, the sort of objections they would raise for naturalists and the objections that they would raise for theism here. The only way they've got any kind of I would say, gravitas is in the ontological discussion, because they want to say, well, God really, really, really objectively grounds it. And so if they are going with the epistemic direction, I just don't think it will. I think that raises problems for their view as well.
Yeah, but they're going to just try, because I know he does this, where he says, look, you can't even have knowledge on unless like Orthodox Christianity is true or something like that. And it's just, anyway.
Yeah.
Of anything within an atheist framework that would account for morality. I've never been able to think of anything that could function like that. Okay, so if I'm wrong, then show me what I'm wrong. Show me what in your worldview could account for morality. But maybe he's about to do that. So this may actually be interesting.
Noise.
Do you know what an argument is?
You cannot get an ought from an is. You're an atheist. In a materialistic worldview, there's no ought.
What does that have to do with atheism?
In a materialistic, atheistic worldview, there are no oughts.
First of all, I'm not a materialist.
You don't know the basic problem
and
of
that's just
ought
another claim. That's just another
claim. It's not a claim, it's an argument. It's a famous historical.
Look,
you don't know the difference between a claim and an argument.
Claim, you can't defend it.
It's an argument. It goes back to David Hume.
You don't know
that.
Right?
You don't know the difference between.
Look what just happened. Look what just happened. This guy said.
What just happened is that you didn't know the difference between an argument and a claim.
Why are you ever talking to me? Why are you scared? Let me talk, right? You just claimed that atheists don't have a foundation of morality. I asked you to defend it. And then you said, you can't get an ought from an is. What the heck?
That's the argument. That's
where are you going to get from that premise, right? You can't derive that.
It's an argument. It's not a premise. It goes back to David Hume. You just didn't know that.
Okay, can we get I think guys, I think we're moving slightly off topic. Let's bring it back to Pride Month.
No, yeah. So think about this. If you're an atheist, okay, a moral obligations are basically put as commands, like do not murder. That sounds like a command. Do not murder. It sounds like an order, right? Your moral obligations are stated as commands. And so what is there in an atheist framework that could be issuing these commands that are?
So he's presupposing that morality boils down to some kind of prescriptivist account, right? Detroit, did you want to say something? You're muted. I want to hear what you have to say.
No, I'm not going to say much. I mean, it's just kind of silly to say that there being facts about what you should or shouldn't do, like linguistically, is similar to how commands function in like natural language. So therefore, wait, if there's a fact about what you should or shouldn't do, then it must be that there's something issuing these commands. Like, come on.
You know what? Like, so I think the argument that he's given as a form kind of like sentences that contain, norms, right? They kind of sound like commands, or at least they can be restated in terms of commands, right? Therefore, they reduce to commands. And what can issue a command? God can issue a command. Therefore, God does issue a command, right? And this is just like a really terrible argument. I mean, by way of parity, you could say, you know what else norms kind of sound like? Like, they kind of sound like music, right? Therefore, they are music. Therefore, some kind of like non-cognitivist music theory of norms is correct, and that's where norms come from. Like that, it's as bad as that.
Well, there's another way to parody this, which is that normative and evaluative language is not just used for morality; it's used for other contexts like food. And everybody knows I love my food examples. But look, we don't just say hurting people just for fun is bad and that it's good to be compassionate. We also say, for instance, pineapple on pizza is good or bad. Now, do we issue that in the form of a command? Don't eat pineapple on pizza. Well, hold on. You can't make claims about whether food is good or bad, or whether pineapple on pizza is good or bad, unless there's somebody issuing these commands. There's got to be a God commanding people. So do we have to have divine food theory and God has to command us what food we eat? Like the fact that our language functions in such a way that normative and evaluative language can be reconstrued naturally in terms of commands does not entail that there must be a commander. Even if it did, the commander could be us. It could be a hypothetical agent. So you could have ideal observer theory. You could say something like, yeah, they function like commands, but that doesn't require that the person issuing the commands to be God or to even be a real person. And so even if someone wanted to say, look, there actually are gastronomic facts about what food you should eat, and they're in some way not dependent on your standards, which seems a bit silly. If you're trying to get some kind of realism out of it, in other words, if you're trying to go directly from the structure of language to the fact that you need to have some sort of objective standard and it must be issued from an entity, if that works for morality, why would that not work for all the other normative domains about which we make claims? And if someone wants to say, oh, well, subjectivism or these non-realist accounts make sense of those, that's funny. They make sense of all of them except morality. Why not? I mean, at least grammatically speaking and like linguistically speaking, they are structured similarly, at least in English. And that's a final point to make, which is that virtually any of these claims that people are going to make are going to be based on the structure of English. And it would be really weird to think that you could draw substantive conclusions about the fundamental nature of reality, including the existence of God and the existence of objective moral facts, by looking at like the grammatical structure of contemporary English. That's insane. There's over 7,000 languages in the world currently, much less that all the historical languages and the languages that have changed over history. Are they all structured that way? What proportion are structured that way? And how do we know?
Yeah, it's like when people say that, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Oh, sorry. It's like when people say there are like laws of nature, and then they draw some connection between those and like laws in a legal context. Oh, then they conclude there must be some sort of lawgiver and they explain those laws of nature. It's just a terrible inference. Although actually, I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, well, let's say even in that case, what's interesting is that the real inference might be the other way around, that there are legal laws, and then people come to do science and start thinking, oh, and then that can bias your thinking towards science. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, let's finish. I think that after this, I have one more clip, and then whatever we have.
Are authoritative. Do not do this, but do this. What is there in an atheistic framework that explains that? I understand in a theistic framework what basically the author of those commands are, the lawgiver. I understand that. I have no idea what you could say from an atheist. And I used to teach philosophical ethics, so I know the claims, but if you have something that we've never heard of that would account for moral obligations, I would love to hear it. But you can't just say, oh, prove that I don't have a, what are you talking about? I've never seen anything. So what are you talking about? It's like saying, imagine someone saying, oh, you're an atheist. You don't even believe in heaven. Okay, prove to me I don't believe in heaven. What are you talking about? What is there?
That's just being so, that's not what Jay Dyer did not say. I don't think you believe XYZ. He's saying that atheists can't account for something, right? So I don't know, David, it looks like you're, I don't know what happened to your listening comprehension. Like, it's just terrible.
Yeah, atheists can't account for this. I've never heard, and then he's saying, well, I've never heard atheists account for that, or I'm not aware of how they might. So what? He doesn't have to support his claim that atheists can't account for it. Now that by default it's back on them to show how they can. Like, what is this? It's just like
it's sliming.
He also said we actually sort of seemingly appealing to who are we? Like all philosophers. I mean, like, and then if he does mean all philosophers, then he's only really. I mean, obviously he's making an argument for ignorance generally, but he's really highlighting his ignorance of the philosophical literature, right? If that's the case.
A moral obligation is, I mean, just think, what is that? It's not material. You don't discover a moral obligation with a microscope or a telescope or something like that.
And did he not hear me say that? I mean, I actually, the more I think about it, I don't really think that this is really an issue for materialists, although there's a big debate about how normativity meshes with materialism or naturalism or whatever. But I'm not even sure that there's those sorts of concern. There are such valid concerns. But I said I wasn't a materialist. Did you not? Like, so why are you bringing this up?
So you're not getting it, of course.
Go ahead.
The feedback is, by the way, Danny, I keep having to mute your sharing tab whenever we pause.
What do I have to do to change that?
I'm either if you mute it yourself, just so you know.
So like mute down here or something.
Yeah, because then it means sometimes when you're no, actually on the StreamYard tab, I reckon. So I'll keep doing it, but just be aware when you hit.
I don't know how to do that.
Don't worry, I'll keep doing it, but be aware. My bad. Play, just to let me know you're about to play or pause, because then I will.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Detroit.
I was just going to say really quickly, and of course, and he's just like clearly ignorant of this. There are a lot of accounts of ethics that are not theistic. So like, I don't look at the literature. Like, it's not that difficult.
Well, he said his argument form there was, well, what is a moral ought? Is it material? it's not material, and it's like, no, that's just your conclusion, right? Like, why think that is the question.
I'm gonna go.
That, where is it? And why would you believe that you actually have one? If you're rejecting God, why would you believe you also have moral obligations that you have to follow? That's the point. You can kind of systematically go through the options. Okay, either you think human beings are just wired this way from our evolutionary history, but guess what? That's not a moral obligation. You could be wired completely differently to do different things. That wouldn't make that moral. Not in the sense of a moral obligation. So you can't just be the way you're wired. Well, what else could it be? Is it society? Well, societies have taught completely different things. So it can't be society. What is it? That's the point. If you say, hey, I've gone through everything I can think of in your worldview.
And just to remind everyone, that's not what Dyer's saying. You're just repackaging what Dyer's saying to make me look like I have the burden.
That could possibly account for morality. I can't think of anything. So you don't have anything. The only way to refute that is to say, no, here's something that you haven't thought of that does account for our moral obligations. But I don't know. Anyway.
Wait. I can't think of anything, therefore you don't have anything. Great inference. Yeah.
And one thing I want to comment on the way he asked that question as well, when he says, where is it? If there's a moral norm, like where is it? Is that I think he's just been confused by the sort of like noun, nominalization, nounification of a word. And it's like, well, look, most when we use nouns to refer to physical objects, we can ask the question, where is their physical location? And there's, an answer to that. So the question can sound very natural. But if I ask where's the economy, right? Like where is the weather? Where is the football game, right? Is it that point there? Does it begin and end here? That, there's all sorts of plausible candidates for things that are wholly physically reducible that we have grammatical nouns for, but the where question doesn't readily furnish us with an answer. So, there's a sense in which if you want a trivial answer, you can say, look, here's a statement, right? I should take the bins out. Now, I think all of that, the sounds I made, they all took place in space and time. And I could, do you want me to just point to sort of this area of sound vibrations? I mean, that's, if I'm supposed to accept this as a legitimate question, then maybe that, something like that is approximately right. But why think that question is legitimate in the first place? And there's just none of this thinking in, their philosophical analysis. And David's meant to be a PhD in philosophy, right?
All right. Anybody wants to say? I think he has he has some credential. I forgot, but it's like
he has a PhD in philosophy. Yeah, bachelor's PhD. I don't know where from.
David Wood?
No comment.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Anybody else want to comment before we go to my last clip and then whatever Nathan wants to go over? Okay. So we're going to travel to 239.
I have just been informed that 4430 is a very good interaction.
What is that?
To check that out now quickly. I've been reliably informed that at 4430 there is a very good interaction.
Don't believe wrong under my perspective. You're misunderstanding subjective morality.
You're not giving it.
Wait, I have a question.
Tell me why it's wrong morally, objectively, if I can also counter it.
Can I ask you this question? Do you think that morality is true dependent upon God's stance or independent of God's stance?
Ultimately, it's grounded.
He's going with the pro dilemma.
Okay, so it's subjective.
God is a subject. Yeah, God is a subject.
No, that's not a subjective argument.
No.
The argument.
God is a
the argument is that it's objective.
God's
the fact that a person makes an argument doesn't make the argument subjective. Your argument is pure subjectivism.
Is God a
Two
subject?
different things. It's a category error.
Yeah. Oh my God. These guys, this is bad. This is dumb.
Yeah, I think the mistake is he thinking that because you think he's making an argument that therefore you're saying the argument is subjective because it's being made by a person.
Yeah, I don't know. It's such a weird thing to say.
Yeah,
it's very strange because he's saying just because a person's making an argument, and then later on he calls it simplification.
I think he means. My best charitable reading is that he actually means ontologically, like you think because God is making a claim, you think that means that it's subjective that God did make that claim, right? Which is, just like slipping in and out of intentional context, getting all confused. But then I think because he's so confused, he says the word argument rather than God and divine command, because he's just sort of like reflexively responding in the debate.
Also, just
I'm really not sure. But Danny, if you continue the clip, you might want to take it back a few seconds because I will. I'll do that. I was talking right in the middle of their reaction.
So I just want to say something real quickly. And note that he didn't actually answer Parker's question, because Parker asked, is it dependent on God's stances? And he said, well, ultimately it's dependent on God. Well, okay, but is it dependent on God's stances? Right? Because it's not clear that if it's dependent on God, that it's subjective or relative.
Yeah, and I hope if you're a Jay Dyer fan, you can kind of sense that, through these clips, that he doesn't answer questions, right? He dodges them because he knows that he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he knows that he said something stupid. He doesn't answer questions directly. And as Lance pointed out earlier, I'm going to start it.
Was it him or Andrew Wilson that couldn't open the pickle jar? Which one?
Wilson.
Oh, okay, so I was going to say he can't answer a question or open a pickle jar, but actually that's the pair of them.
Objective.
God's
the fact that a person makes an argument doesn't make the argument subjective. Your argument is pure subjectivism.
Is God a
Two
subject?
different things. It's a category error.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
These guys, this is bad. This is dumb right now.
If you are an atheist, this is the lamest argument that you can make. I even thought this as an atheist. How does one actually think this is a good argument? This is the lamest, dumbest argument that you can make in terms of
Extremely.
morality. As an atheist, please, man, it just makes you look idiotic. It doesn't help your position at all. It is an incredibly stupid argument.
Has he just said the same thing 5 times in a row? Like, why? Why is it stupid?
Yeah, what's the He just asked him if it's a matter of God's stances, and if it is, then it's not an objectivist theory. I mean, what's the problem with that? Like, I don't get it.
But as asking questions to ensure that people are articulating something coherent is not one. That's not an argument, and 2, why is it stupid?
So someone could be asking you a lame question, right? That there's a very easy answer to. But I think the good or Christian attitude towards philosophy there would be to help that person, right? To say, oh, well, here's how I think about it. I actually used to think that myself, but here's something I found really helpful in my thinking about this topic. So yeah, I just think there's not a reason there. It's all about shaming, and it's all about this power asymmetry bullshit stuff. So.
Do you want to expand on that, Damon?
I'm assuming these guys are going to expand, but this is just terrible. So we only saw a couple of seconds, but it sounds like they're saying. So if we talk about are your moral obligations is that subjective or objective? What that means is it just based on like your personal preferences and feelings, or is it something beyond you that is actually it's not just your feelings. It goes beyond. It's something that is actually an authority. And so when Jay says, no, God.
Let's pause there. I feel like Lance could say something there.
No, I don't have anything to say.
Okay. Well, he just said that what we're asking about is whether it's subjective or not, is whether does it matter? Is our moral facts dependent on you, your feelings, your attitudes? He didn't use the word attitude, but let's just say he did. Or something outside of you.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I'm being silly and not noticing.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say something with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why that. I don't know. I glitch out sometimes. Okay, so typically within metaethics, the way that moral realism and moral anti-realism are distinguished from one another is that moral realists think that there are stance-independent moral facts. That means that there are facts about what's morally right or wrong, good or bad or whatever, that are true, but they're not made true by anybody's stances.
And just so that everyone that's keeping up, because some people are watching you and never heard stance, right? By stance, we just kind of mean attitude, right? That's kind of roughly what we mean.
Yeah, a stance. But, I actually use the term more broadly than that. It would be like any standard by which one could make a moral claim or evaluate some action as good or bad, right or wrong. It could be the standards of a book. It could, like, you could find a book and it says murder's bad, stealing's good. That you could say what's right or wrong relative to the book. I would be happy to call that the book has stances. So I don't know that stances have to necessarily be psychological states. Because we could talk about the stances of dead people, and I don't think it would be nonsensical. Like, would you say, well, they're dead, so they don't have a brain, so they don't have psychological states, so they don't have a stance? Like, you should be able to talk about like hypothetical or former stances or that sort of thing, or fictional stances. So we don't have to interpret stance doesn't have to be like literally reducible to like a particular neurophysiological state. I mean, that would be an unnecessarily restrictive conception of what stances are. But the point here is simply that the moral, what makes the moral claims true, if it hinges on the perspective or the attitude or the stance or the values or the beliefs. We don't necessarily need a super technical or like rigid set of terminology here. Come on, this is not that complicated of an idea. That and even if we wanted to make it fairly narrow, we could say, fine, okay, so it depends on the attitude, so the position of an agent. Even if you wanted to make it restrictive in that way, is God an agent? Is God an individual? Is God a subject? I would think for a lot of Christians, the answer to that would be yes. But in any case, it is not the case that within contemporary metaethics that stance independence and stance dependence turns on whether the moral standards depend on human stances. That would be silly for the obvious reason that, like, what if we run into aliens and the aliens have moral positions? Would we say, well, they're not human, so there's objective? That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Or AIs, like what if an artificial intelligence has a moral stance? So hinging on humans doesn't really make a lot of sense. If you could say, oh, well, they're only dependent on the stances of finite beings. Like, you could carve up the terminology that way if you wanted to, but that's just not typically how people carve up the terminology. Keep in mind, the terminological distinctions that we draw in philosophy, that's a matter of social construction. We decide. We could just decide for whatever reason that pigeons they're just not living organisms. We could say the word organism refers to all living things that meet these criteria except for pigeons arbitrarily. You could just carve out a special space. But what you'll notice is that within contemporary metaethics, virtually nobody does this. And then when you get into discussions with apologists and people online talking about this sort of thing, when they're taking a religious perspective, and it becomes increasingly apparent that their position is that the moral facts do depend on God's stance, and they're hit with, hey, stance dependence makes your position a type of anti-realism, suddenly there's this special exclusion for God. And it's completely ad hoc. It's not in accord with how these terms are conventionally used among philosophers. This is just like a special pleading weird thing that people do. And the thing is, there's not really anything fundamentally at stake other than the labels that we're using. Like, okay, so if a position like William Lane Craig's or somebody else's is technically an anti-realist position because it's dependent on God's stance, so what? You could still make the point, yeah, it's dependent on God's stance, but God is necessarily good. And so all these moral facts, they really couldn't be different than what they are. And so technically speaking, God couldn't command you to go torture people because it's against God's nature as a loving being. They could still point out that the moral facts wouldn't be arbitrary. They could point to all these things where it's not like conventional, more like metaethical cultural relativism where moral facts are contingent on, like, okay, here would be a point. The moral facts wouldn't be contingent. So there's all sorts of things that they could point to where these moral facts, they don't have the features that people typically find objectionable about anti-realist positions, your conventional stance-dependent relativism, subjectivism, whatever, various types of constructivism. So why not just say that and embrace the anti-realist label? For some reason, they really don't like the optics of the term anti-realism, and they will twist themselves into pretzels to not use the term anti-realism. I think that's telling.
Yeah, and listen, I want everyone to re-listen to what he said in his characterization of I think presumably subjectivism or versus objectivism.
I'm assuming these guys are going to expand, but this is just terrible. So we only saw a couple seconds, but it sounds like they're saying. So if we talk about are your moral obligations is that subjective or objective? What that means is it just based on like your personal preferences and feelings, or is it something beyond you that is actually it's not just your feelings. It goes beyond. It's something that is actually an authority and
actually an authority that could be our government, right? For all, it seems like he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Like so far, if I were to think that, morality isn't a function of my stances, it's whatever Trump says or whatever the United States government says, right? So far, that would qualify as objectivism on his characterization, because for him, and this goes back to everything that Lance was saying, subjectivism, it can only be indexed to you, the person that's thinking about the distinction.
Yeah, a couple points about that is that, I mean, cultural relativism already holds that moral facts depend on the standards of your culture, which means that they don't depend on
you, right? Yeah.
Right. So if you're going through your culture saying, hey, I think abortion is permissible, but your culture says, nope, like 99% of people are against it, or whatever authorities in your culture, could be your government, says abortion is wrong, then abortion is wrong according to your culture. And that's not dependent on your standards. In fact, it's not even dependent on any particular individual standards. It's kind of this diffuse institutional fact that the individual attitudes of people may or may not have any particular direct influence on. It's going to be a sort of collective fact. But in principle, relativistic views that are stance dependent could be contingent on the stance of like the species as a whole. So you could say it's dependent on what humanity believes. You could relativize moral standards to species. So, look at something like Star Trek, where like Klingons have their own code. So then if you have like species-based morality, okay, so then the standards are not based on your attitudes. It's something outside of you. That's not realism. That's not objectivism. That would just be like species relativism. So this idea that the moment we step away from the individual, boom, you've got objectivism. That's not true. It's entirely consistent with moral anti-realism for there to be facts about what you are obligated to do that do not depend on your personal attitudes. I'll give one last example. Ideal observer theory is an anti-realist view. It holds, ideal observer theory, that what you should do is what a fully informed and ideally rational agent would do. Now, why is this a type of anti-realism? Well, because there's a set of moral facts, and those moral facts depend on the stances of a hypothetical agent. And you're obligated to do what that agent would do.
Wait, I have a question about that, actually.
And it doesn't matter if you don't want to do it.
I have a question about the ideal observer theory. So do you think that we should contrast, you ought to do what an ideal observer would characteristically do versus, or basically what they're disposed, I guess character, you kind of understand your obligations of character and nature or something like that, versus their attitudes? Or do you think there's no distinction between that? If you are saying that, yeah, I'm going to do what I think what a virtuous person would characteristically do, or what an ideal observer would characteristically do, is that also committing yourself to saying that those oughts depend on that ideal observer stances?
I think so.
Okay.
That's getting a little weird. Maybe
because we're going to see in a second that, like for instance, Craig wants to ground values in terms of the nature of God, and that those values we're fine to say are objective because it doesn't depend on the nature. It doesn't depend on the stances. It depends on the nature. I'm wondering if ideal observer theorists could do the same thing, and thus there could be versions of ideal observer theory that are realist.
I
think Detroit told me this point, so maybe
I don't know that it's typically construed that way. I mean, that could be like, maybe you could have some type of ideal observer theory where you say what you should do is what like a perfectly virtuous person would be disposed to do. But then that, like, I don't know what, like, the normative evaluations are based on some fact about the disposition or character that the being has in question to act in the relevant context. You're no longer looking at actions and then evaluating what you're obligated to do in that case, because that's the judgment that the agent would reach in that case. So I don't know. Okay. Maybe Friction knows more about this than me. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's not something I've really thought all that much about. I'm fine just saying that, like, maybe some of these versions of ideal observer theory are a little bit more ambiguous, but it doesn't really matter. Like,
yeah, they're going to start looking like some of these like teleological accounts in a certain respect. Like, they're going to start looking like saying, hey, given your nature, given what kind of being or entity you are, there's facts about what you should do. And I would typically think of those as realist accounts, because if you say in virtue of being a human being, I ought to self-actualize in a particular sort of way. Well, now what is it that makes it true that I ought to do something, like something about my biology or the kind of being I am? That's not a stance. That's not a stance.
But what's interesting about these people, though, is that if I were to say, well, look, it's not about my attitudes, it's about my individual essence or my nature or my character, I would place money that they would say, well, that's still subjectivism, right? So, but then they hold a double standard for God, right? They make this careful distinction between God's will, God's nature. But if it's God's nature, it's not subjectivism, fine. but I can't pull the same move, right? You asked them the same question. I think DGH in the chat kind of made this point to another Christian apologist, MJ DeMore, Democracy of the Dead guy, right? That he counted, well, if I were to say, it's about Danny-ness, it's about Danny's individual essence, that would be subjective, but it wouldn't be subjective if it's about godliness or God's nature. And so I think there's a bit of a weird, there's a mirror there that they're not accounting for. I think there's kind of a...
you're clarity to that point, because I think it builds on a point Lance made about the anti-realism, realism distinction, right? So I think that for there's this concept in political science called diagonalism, right? And also in psychology of schemas, the idea being that there are certain concepts, right, that can be kind of like clustered together, or they connote one another. And I think that what's going on in a lot of these apologetic circles and in the presentation of particularly people like Jay Dyer, Andrew Wilson, is that there are certain sort of like aesthetic themes that characterize the philosophy that they believe in. And I think a part of that are these words like realism, really, objectively, right? And I think I think this is indicative of a sort of almost NPC philosophy that they're engaged in, where because of their aesthetic fixation on these terms such as objective and not being subjective, because, you know, objective is like God, tradition, and subjective is like relativism, postmodernism, people with blue hair, bad. And so they feel this need in a philosophical taxonomy of positions to say, well, I have to defend the realism, the objective one, before they've even really considered or thought about what their views are, right? I think if you ask the question, what's actually at stake here, you know, and you hear David Wood making these kind of claims, well, what's at stake is these questions like, who has the authority, right? And at the end of the day, or why do things matter from, from an ultimate perspective or over a very long timeline? And you can still challenge these sorts of questions about why they matter. But these concerns are basically about, you know, who has the right to enforce something or operate a certain way. And, you know, the answer to all of these questions can be God, with it being a subjective theory, right? So you can say, look, God just commands what he commands, right? And it's God commanding them. Like, you know, you can say that's arbitrary. Okay, you go and tell God that what he commands is arbitrary. Like, it's God, for God's sake. Like, what, you know, are you going to say the United States Constitution is bigger than God? You're going to say, you know, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, it's God. But yeah, it's subjective. Who cares, right? That's not, because this taxonomy in philosophy between subjectivism and objectivism, or realism versus anti-realism, just doesn't map in a way that addresses any of my concerns. It's simply a taxonomy of available positions. They don't realize this because they're playing NPC philosophy.
Yeah, I'll just say I completely agree. Whether theistic accounts of morality ultimately end up being an anti-realist position, as far as I'm concerned, has absolutely no implications at all. It's not an L for them. It optically might sound bad in many, many contexts, but it doesn't really matter.
Muted. All right, can we continue?
And so when Jay says, no, God is the standard, the same, but God's a subject, you know, and therefore it's just subjective morality. It's whatever God decides. And there you're not understanding the terms. And the fact that guy all the way on the left teaches philosophy, he should know better. This is embarrassingly terrible.
God is not a subject.
And the fact that you have a PhD from Trump University, right? And still, you know, now everything makes sense. Right. But like, you know, hopefully you can learn from this video, David Wood.
Well, which terms do you allegedly not understand?
Subjectivism.
And also they're saying he seems to be challenging the idea that God's a subject there, AP as well, which is kind of odd. Let's
oh, he's about to say he's a different type of subject, I think.
But yeah, he goes on to say that, but wasn't Dyer conceding that God is a subject, or an individual at least?
Well, he didn't answer. He dodged.
He dodged.
Yeah, but his again, he kept responding like, you said, is he an individual? And he's like, but that, like, he was kind of responding as if he was implying that he was.
It's implied that his answer was yes by the dodge, I think, right? Like,
no, but it's not just the dodge, right? It's not just the failure to say no. Like, again, if somebody says like, did you steal the cookies? And you say, but they were so delicious. That is implying yes, but they were so delicious. Like, you could almost hear the yes in his response.
That's
so he wasn't just not answering. He was answering in a way that seemed to imply that there was a tacit yes there.
Well, yeah, there was something that he said was like, just because God is a subject doesn't mean that it's subjective morality. He did say that. Okay.
Well, you could also take it back to where you're repeatedly asking him, and then he's responding again with I don't know if you want to take it back. Are you able to do that?
Yeah. We can go back if it helps. Let's see. We're at 40. So I'm going to go back.
You got to see him responding to you, pressing him. Dyer specifically.
No, that's not a subjective argument.
No.
The argument.
God is a
the argument is
subject.
that it's objective.
God's
The
a
fact that a
subjective.
person
God is
makes an
subjective.
argument doesn't make the argument subjective. Your argument
God is
is
a
pure
subject.
subjectivism.
Is God a
Two
subject?
different things. It's a category error.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
These guys, this is bad. This is
Oh, well,
Not them.
dumb right
Yeah.
now.
If you are an atheist,
I think it was in your earlier clip actually, Danny, where you know the one we played right at the start. I don't know if we'll find it now, but like right at the start, you asked him, is God an individual when he
Right.
brought up individual?
This is
Right at that
after,
point.
it hasn't happened yet. Then I don't.
Okay, I see.
as an atheist,
You're not understanding.
That's
No, you
idiotic.
can't.
Wait, God having his particular view on morality is no different than me having my view because we're both subjects.
The
Can you tell me
argument
what a
is that
no, you're not. You're not a subject in the
Yeah,
same sense. You're a categorically different subject.
No, you moved
moved
ahead. You moved ahead.
No, I think this is okay. I'll go back. I thought there was.
God is not
I'm
a
in the right
subject
spot.
in the same sense. That,
that's
that
a different
subject-
sense.
That a subject would be a
No,
subject.
this is where he's talking about God as a subject in a different
Okay, I'm
sense.
wrong.
This is
I'm wrong.
before that. This is Jay Dyer
What are you
responding
looking
to
for?
you.
Here we go.
idiotic.
Okay, we've
It
heard
doesn't
this
help
one.
your position at all. It is an incredibly stupid argument.
How do I do this? I need to go faster.
Do you want to expand on that thing?
I'm assuming these guys are going to expand, but this is just terrible. So we only saw a couple seconds, but it sounds like they're saying. So if we talk about are your moral
We've heard
obligations, is that
this.
subjective or objective? What that means is it just based on like your personal preferences and feelings, or is it something beyond you that is actually it's not just your feelings? It goes beyond something that is actually an authority. And so when Jay says, God is a standard, saying, but God's a subject, and therefore it's just subjective morality. It's whatever God decides.
Not in
And
the
there
same
you're
sense.
not understanding the terms. And the fact that guy all the way on the left teaches philosophy, he should know better. This is embarrassingly terrible.
God is not a subject in the same sense.
That's a different sense.
That a subject would be a
Nah,
subject.
Just equip.
God would not be a subject in this case, in the same sense that any random observer would be a subject.
So just to pause on that claim, though, right? So maybe he's making the same point as Jay here. So Jay did say God's an individual earlier in the Piers clip that we played, or at least dodge that question, and maybe we can find and bring that up if it's relevant. But here he's saying when you ask the question, "Is God a subject?" Jay claims it's a category error, right? AP is saying God is a subject, but not in the relevant sense. And there's a way in which this is sort of right in the apophatic tradition of theology. The problem is that if you're playing that game, you've undermined your ability to do any of this moral realism stuff, right? If you're appealing to the inadequacy of our language for attaching to God, the via negativa, that we can't speak in a univocal sense or in anything other than an analogous sense or a poetic sense about God, and then you're explicating a theory of moral realism about God, right? You can't do that. You can't just appeal to this convenient idea of I say God's a subject, but I mean it in a very special sense in this case. But also here's my explicit theory of how realism works. You just have to appeal to mystery, unfortunately, consistently.
Yeah, and if they do think that God literally is a subject, not in some apophatic sense or like figurative sense or whatever, then the fact that he's maybe a different sort of subject, it just seems to be totally irrelevant. The question is whether subjectivism isn't saying, well, the moral facts are fixed by stances of certain sorts of subjects. No, it's by subjects, right? And if it's a subject, then it's not relevant that God is different from other subjects in certain ways. That would just be a terrible inference.
Yeah, they go on to really harp on this point where as if you misunderstood or something, or as if this is remotely relevant, where they're like, okay, well, God is a subject, but not the same kind of subject, not the same kind of subject. If the only question is are the moral facts dependent on the standards of a subject? Yes or no. Saying they're a different kind of subject is completely irrelevant to that point. It's like if someone says, hey, they arrived in a vehicle and I think it was a car, and they're like, no, it was a truck. So you're completely wrong about them arriving in a vehicle. No, they still arrived in a vehicle. It just wasn't a car. That's irrelevant to the claim they arrived in a vehicle. And it's the same thing here. They're not understanding, and they're not understanding in a weird way. What does God being a different kind of subject have to do with the question of whether
we're about to get to that too, because there's a point where, guys, spoiler alert, where we interact with them. I think Nathan and I interact with them through the chat, and it's actually quite embarrassing for them, so stick around for that. Let's get through this, unless anybody...
God is not an involved subject in this case. This is a stupid argument, an incredibly stupid argument.
Is God a subject?
It's two different categories. A subjective...
Exactly.
Argument.
We're two different people too. Right?
Different than a person who's a subject making an argument. Those are two different.
The point is that God is a subject; he's not an object, right? We're subjects, right? We understand morality in terms of God. In fact,
that's you're equivocating again.
But can we bring this?
Exactly what I said.
Equivocation. Exactly. Thank you.
And this what is the equivocation? Yeah. What is it? Which term are you equivocating on? So you're using a term in one sense and then you're using it in another sense. Subject, presumably?
Yeah, I think there's some equivocation on subject between the person case and God case, but
this is not equivocation. This is not equivocation. So if you have the category,
it only is if what Nathan said earlier was right, in the sense that, but if they're talking about God as a subject, it's a non-literal use.
So the dilemma is the dilemma is, right, either if they're using it in a meaningful sense, right, when they talk about God, such that they have a realist theory of morality, right, then it is a subjective theory because he's still a subject, right? There's a meaningful sense of subject that's being used. If they're using it in some kind of apophatic sense, right, to mean some kind of theological language that doesn't have any strict sense, but maybe it's sort of poetic or a way of relating to God as a person, but it doesn't actually mean anything. Now they've just undermined their ability to articulate a metaphysical theory. They just can't do that. They have to remain silent and pray that God will help them improve their moral character and philosophical views.
Yeah, if they deny that God is a subject in the literal sense, then okay, maybe it wouldn't be a subjective theory. There might be other issues, but anyway.
Lots of issues.
But if that is what they wanted to do, do they, at any point in this video, do they do that or do they explain that? And do the people commenting on this do that or explain that? So
no, they're too dumb. They're too dumb.
If they're not doing that, and if all they mean is, no, God is literally a subject, but a different kind of subject than like human subjects, this is what is the equivocation? Because if you're saying, hey, the category of position in metaethics is these are positions that are dependent on stances, and if they're dependent on the standards of a subject, that qualifies as a stance. If that's the view is saying this refers to all literal subjects. Okay, so if God is a literal subject, but is a different kind of subject than a human subject, the view it's still included in that category.
Right.
So it'd be like if you said,
let's talk about it because I mentioned that he asked me about this. Yeah.
Oh, real? Okay, well, fair enough.
To be a psychologist, you don't have to be a philosophy teacher to understand this. I'm not a philosophy teacher. I took maybe a few courses on philosophy. That's it. This guy's supposed to be a philosophy teacher. The heck?
Those poor students. Those poor students.
No, you want to run away. No, wait, God having his particular view on morality is no different than me having my view because we're both subjects.
The argument is
no, you're not a subject in the same sense. You're categorically different subjects. Oh my God.
Even if you said you and God are subjects in the same sense, you couldn't say your view was equally valid. God would be all-knowing and all-powerful and the creator of everything else. And therefore, even if we went with your stupid definition and your equivocation, what you said would still not be true.
How dumb can
and this subject would be wearing a red hat, and so it's not the same. What are you saying? Like, how does it make a difference whether it's a subjectivist theory? Like, it's not.
Have a machine gun, so you'd have to listen to this subject, otherwise they shoot you with a machine gun, right?
It dependent on subject means dependent on a subject. Saying but the subject is different than another subject doesn't mean they're not a subject. The claim it's like they seem to think you're saying, hey, moral facts are dependent on subjects, and in the case of a conventional subjectivism, the subject is a human subject, but God's not the same kind of subject, and so this can't be subjectivism because God is that's irrelevant. The view is simply moral facts are dependent on the standards of in this case, subjects. It simply does not matter what the other characteristics of them are. If they're literally a subject, then you've got an anti-realism.
Right. I hope everyone appreciates how low tier this objection is. It is lowest of the lowest tier. I mean, it's embarrassing, right? It's just, it makes you wonder how he got these. I know he got these following because these two are bigoted towards Muslims, and there are a lot of resentful Christians that want to be secure in their Christianity and feel good about attacking other religions. That's how these people got popular. It's not because of their intelligence or their mastery of the subject. It's because they're bigots, right, towards other religious views, right? And you could see it here. This is actually so low tier. This is low tier.
What you're forgetting is that my subject could beat up your subject. So category mistake.
Well, Danny, they're criticizing your teaching, but if this was a point that a student made in one of my papers, I would mark points off and I'd tell them, like, you made like a factual mistake here. This isn't like a legitimately different philosophical perspective to take. Like, I'm an empiricist. If a student makes some like argument for synthetic a priori truth or something in a paper, I'm going to evaluate it on its own terms. I'm not going to go, well, empiricism is true, so you're wrong. So points out, like, that'd be ridiculous. Like, obviously people can like argue from a Kantian perspective or something. This is just like incorrect. And just, so they're criticizing your teaching. If you were teaching in this way, you would be doing a great job. So they're misunderstanding here. And it's just the combination of being incorrect and then being so confident about it that they're saying like, oh, this has got to be bad for the people around you, that they have to be victimized by your ignorance when you're not even wrong. Wow.
My high school students do better than this, right? They do better. They just do. So how does that feel, David?
And I think this is still the point from before, is that I think it comes back to, they know the words realism and objective. They have a conclusion about those that's related to their sense of their need for certainty and maybe other sort of like political views connected to their theology. And so they're just working backwards from that conclusion of, we must be objective and we must be realists because those things are good and the other things are bad. And so how do we now make it work? Well, we make it work by just jumping all over the place with, all of these other commitments, because we've not actually thought about this very carefully or arrived at a consistent view. And I actually think, there's a theological criticism here again, which would be to say that they detract from like the glory of God or God's personhood by having to, as if God's moral stances or something would only matter if God were metaphysically real, like a metaphysical theory or something, rather than God being a person as God, and thereby having that worth in virtue of like their being God or something like that. So yeah,
you know what, this might be slightly irrelevant. I mean, it's related, but you can be an atheist and technically hold to divine command theory, right? Like, you could say, well, look, I don't believe in God because of XYZ reason, but I still would understand morality in terms of a hypothetical God that would exist, right? You could actually, so like, I wonder how they would respond there. Like, yeah, I understand morality in terms of a hypothetical case where the Christian God does exist, and then, or if Jesus was what he claimed to be in the Gospels or whatever, what are you going to say to there? Right? So it seems like, I think it kind of ties in with a little bit of what you're saying, but
yeah, you might think that you get a sort of ideal observer theory.
Yeah, it's like an ideal observer theory. Yeah. Okay.
Or in some views, it's the nature of God or something that fixes the moral facts. But you might not think that there existing something with that nature is relevant or necessary. Nature itself, right, is enough to fix the moral.
Yeah, I'm going to start going around saying, I think divine command theory is compatible with atheism, so I can grant your theory. Like.
Unless you're delusional enough to think that you're omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscient and so on, and the creator of everything, which you might, given how some of these young atheists are nowadays.
Yeah. So you subscribe, let's get this straight. You follow a certain moral system and a certain belief system.
David Ryan there, good one. That's what I was thinking. So Danny thinks objective refers to an object. Yeah, that's what he thinks.
So you follow.
And by object here, I just meant not a subject. That's all I meant, right? Because if we're contrasting objective versus subjective, right? I'm just meaning like anything that is not a subject is going to count as an object. So they're being uncharitable to me. Of course, they would be charitable as all hell to anybody else that they agree with. But when I say God is not an object, I'm saying he's not, he's a subject. That's all I'm saying.
So even just to say though, you could be right? It might be the case that for something to be an objective theory, there would need to be an object, right? And then that would just rule out theism being an objective theory. Like, why would that be a problem as a view? That could be one way to go. And the question is just one of dependence. Like, so is sure, God's commandment, the act of commanding, might be like an object that can be referred to as something in some sense, but it depends on God's stances still, and that's what they always seem to avoid.
Right, and these Trinitarians should know, because they make this distinction when they're defending the Trinity, right? There's a difference between who and what, right? Okay, like they make a big deal about that distinction. God is one what, three who's, right? That's all that. It's almost the same sort of thing. So I don't. It's like they've forgotten their own apologetic shtick. Anyways.
A certain belief system, a certain moral system, a certain religious system. In this religious system, within this certain religious system, it is established that there are objective moral values, right? And as somebody who is then part of this religious system, you follow this guideline of objective moral values. You don't do subjective morals in this case.
I don't even know what he said.
You can't necessarily or really argue.
I zoned out.
He's just saying that according to the view, it's an objective theory, but that's not responding to the criticism. I just don't. It's just like a so silly point. I don't.
Well, I don't think there stands independent moral facts, but according to my view, I'm a moral realist.
I also don't know. Like,
it's my view. It's my view. You can't tell me what. Like, I've said what my view is. I stipulated that that's what the view is. I don't believe in God. I believe God doesn't exist, but I stipulate that I'm a theist because so on my view, I'm a theist.
Yeah. I don't actually know though what he even thinks here. Like for example, like just take like Christian theology again. Where in the Bible does it say like this is an objective moral? Where does it like kind of flesh out some kind of like moral realism, stance independence, objective fact? It doesn't say any of these things, right? There's like Jesus saying some random parables, and then you're meant to interpret those in your life or something. Like, there's no kind of like worked out theory of facts and propositions and grounding or something that you're getting out of some standard reading of theology here.
Yeah, none of this is in the scripture. There's not a single passage that I've ever seen that supports interpreting Christianity to have a realist system of morality. When I've asked Christians for passages, they typically give me stuff like, the law of God is written in our hearts. That's not realism or anti-realism. That's like God instilling in people an innate predisposition to recognize what the moral facts are. And those moral facts could be dependent on his stances. So that doesn't give you realism. It doesn't have anything to do with realism. And what concerns me is that I've asked this, I don't know, a half dozen times, maybe a dozen times. And I always get the same kind of passages that have nothing to do with metaethics. And what this suggests is not only, if there were passages there, I would expect people to be able to provide them. But it also shows that the people providing these passages do not understand metaethics at a very basic level. Because if they did, they would realize why there are not passages supporting metaethics at like a realist interpretation of the scripture. And they wouldn't provide them as alleged ones. And then when I've challenged them on this, and I'm like, that passage has nothing to do with realism, I get obstinacy. I get people getting angry with me. Like this has just been my experience. Maybe if I go talk to some Bible scholars, they'll be like, oh yeah, here's the realist passage right here. If it's there, I haven't seen it. And, I'll bet that there isn't a single passage in all of biblical scripture that supports moral realism. Not one.
Okay,
let's get challenged to Christians.
Even the one you raised about it being inscribed on your heart, you could even make a case, I think, that that's God enforcing subjective morality, right? Because it's internal to your stance or something. Yeah.
For atheists, for naturalists who don't have an objective moral system that is grounded in something that you can actually demonstrate and establish. You can't say, well, your moral system depends on that figure that established these moral rules, and that person is a subject. Therefore, you also have subjective moral values. You can't really make that argument. It's a dumb argument. You can't compare that to you guys justifying certain things based on who is talking, for example. It doesn't work that way. That's not the topic.
And I mean, if you took him seriously, right, that since he's a subject, he gets to decide what's right and wrong. Great. Then Parker, I can decide to slap the freaking crap out of you anytime I want, and that's like my subject. So, do you really believe that whatever any person decides, that's equally binding for reality? How in the name of common sense can you even talk to Andrew and Jay and tell them that they should be listening to you? How Parker, you're a subject, but they're subjects too, so therefore you can't correct them. Oh my goodness, and everything is equally valid.
Stupid. Danny says to you that you should learn basic philosophy.
Oh, thanks, Danny. I'll go out and do that right now. I'll try and learn some basic philosophy because Danny told me to. The guy who thinks I don't know.
Here's his explanation.
So which brings us to, let me make it to where it's not.
I think we've lost your. Are you still there, Danny?
Am I here?
Oh yeah. What
Okay, so let's bring Craig now. I'm gonna go to because I think I think everyone should pay attention here, because this is if you deal with William Lane Craig parrots, now you have something to say about his metaethical account. So this book, A Debate on God and Morality, this is rather recent. He debates a guy named Eric Wielenberg, who's basically gives something like a non-naturalist realist view. In the after the introduction, which I'm about to pass, this is what Craig says. He makes no, I gotta scroll down. Give me a second. Where's the opening statement? Opening statement. Oh my god, this introduction's for. Okay, there it is. Okay. So this is Craig. Craig is talking here. He wrote this, right? Okay. In this first paragraph, I'm not going to read it. He distinguishes between values and and duties, obligations. Okay. So for Craig, there's a sharp distinction between moral values, so good and bad, and then right and wrong, which has to do with obligations. Fine. That's actually a distinction that a lot of philosophers do make in moral philosophy. So Craig wants to say moral values are grounded in God, specifically in God's nature. Okay. He is by nature loving, generous, faithful, kind, and so forth. Right. So he grounds good and bad, all those virtues being good in terms of God's nature. Then when it comes to duties, listen to this. On a theistic view, objective moral duties are constituted by God's will or commands. God's moral nature is expressed in relation to us in the form of divine commands. I'm going to highlight everything. Okay. In the form of divine commands, which constitute our moral duties or obligations. Far from being arbitrary, God's commands must be consistent with his holy and loving nature. Our duties then are constituted by God's commands, and then in turn reflect his essential nature. So there's this atheist philosopher, Michael Hume, who pointed out in page around one. Let me go to. I would have to I have the physical copy of the book, so I'm going to go to page. I have the page where Craig responds to him, but I forgot to mark the page, so I'm going to go to page 149. So I was close.
Close, yeah, a little bit off.
Yeah. Okay. So he says. So this Mike Hume, who's an atheist, says. Neither Craig or Wielenberg actually define objective morality. I'm not going to read all of this. There is objective morality provided that there are truths about what is good and bad, right and wrong, which obtain independent of attitudes of observers toward the object's evaluation. And then now the first problem for Craig's account of morality is that it's simply not an objectivist theory. If true, it makes morality subjective, not objective. Okay. So maybe there was some wiggle room to make, the way that we should understand God's duties is still in terms of God's nature, because God's nature has this connection to what God would will or command. So maybe there's, I could see where Hume would get this, accuse Craig's view of being subjectivist. But then when Craig responds to Hume's point, it makes it very clear. So go to 191. So then Craig responds to this.
Blaring, I think, Danny? Or no, it's my bad. I accidentally changed the view.
So look at what Craig has to say in response to Hume's charge. 191. Okay. No, I'm 192. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay. I thought it was 191. Sorry, everyone. Give me a second.
Stephen C. Evans. People always refer to Stephen C. Evans. There are a few. I think there were like two.
Oh, 195. 195. I should have had all these, but I didn't do my homework. Okay. What about, so this is Craig talking. This is William Lane Craig talking. What about Hume's objections to DCT, divine command theory's account of moral duties? Here we return to Hume's allegation that divine command theory is subjectivist theory. Remember, this is Craig. We saw that the allegation is flatly false with respect to moral values. Now, I think everybody on this panel agrees that if Craig is understanding moral values, not in terms of the will or attitude or stances of God, but in terms of his nature, fine. That's not subjectivist. Okay, it's realist. We're fine with that. But then Craig, okay, but that's values. Remember, he distinguishes between good and bad, right and wrong. Our obligations are not the same thing as our values, or the values. But what about moral duties, which are constituted by God's commands and so dependent on his will? Truths about right or wrong are not independent of God's attitudes. So, Lance, do you want to say something about that?
Sorry, I got distracted. Can you go over that again?
Yeah. So here he says, what about moral duties, which are constituted by God's commands and so dependent on his will? Truths about right and wrong are not independent of God's attitude. So what can you say about that and subjectivism?
Yeah. So that would make him some type of anti-realist about like what I guess moral duties. What he could say, look, this is him saying it. So you sometimes if you're looking at a text or you're looking at someone's characterization of a position or something like that, you have to do a bit of like interpretation. And you could look at an account that's presenting itself as divine command theory. Maybe some of them are realist, maybe some of them are anti-realist. I'm sure lots of divine command theorists are going to present their account as a realist account, but this is anti-realism. Now, what makes this interesting is that Craig could still say he's a moral realist about evaluative facts, but that he would in this case looks like a concession to saying he's a moral anti-realist about like I guess like deontics or something like that. So claims like should, shouldn't, those sorts of claims. We could just say normative claims. That would be the distinction. So he would be a normative anti-realist and an evaluative realist, maybe something like that.
And I want everyone to comment on this last bit. Okay. So now when one reflects that much of what God morally wills or commands is willed and commanded by him necessarily, being entailed by the divine nature, and therefore neither contingent nor arbitrary, then the dependence of right or wrong on God's attitude serves mainly to call into question Hume's characterization of objective morality. Attitude dependence is supposed to express the contingency and arbitrariness of the features so dependent, and that is what makes subjectivism and morality objectionable. But that fails significantly to apply to God. A better definition of objective morality would appeal to the independence of the attitudes of human observers or finite observers.
No, that's not how this works. That's not how this works. This would be a better definition. So, like, look, if somebody says, look, hey, we in the field, we've agreed, this is box A, this is box B. Realism stands independent. Anti-realism stands dependent. And then you come along and you're like, sure, fine, okay, so the normative effects are stance dependent, but this should call into question how we characterize realism. And then this is the key part where he says, this part about attitude dependence is supposed to express the contingency and arbitrariness of the features so dependent. And that is what makes subjectivism and morality objectionable. No, it's that people like Craig may find contingency and arbitrariness objectionable. And so they would object to an account of subjectivism that had the moral facts be dependent on the standards of contingent and arbitrary values of individuals. That would be fine, but that's not a problem for subjectivism. Subjectivism, the subject could be a being whose values are arbitrary and contingent, or it could be a being whose values aren't contingent and arbitrary. Doesn't matter. That's what the distinction is. So it's like he's reasoning his way backwards in a very weird, like revisionary, strange way. No, his account is a type of anti-realism. He doesn't get to revise what anti-realism is in this special case because of some position he has, like here. Like, this is why we found subjectivism objectionable. It's why who found it objectionable. And even if it's the case that people find conventional human contingent subjectivism objectionable for the reasons that it's contingent and arbitrary, why doesn't he just go around saying, I'm like a anti-contingentist, arbitrary anti-realist? Because that's what he is.
Yeah. No, he could just say, I accept technically it's a subjectivist theory, but it avoids certain issues that are common on other subjectivist theories.
Yep.
And that's fine, right? I mean,
but
maybe
Tutorial, that would ruin his apologetic, right? Because then he can't go around and telling atheists that they don't have morality or they can't ground it.
Yeah, I think
also, he goes around whipping out the moral argument, and how can he whip out the moral argument if he's an anti-realist?
Well, because he's redefined. I mean, maybe this is exactly what's going on, right? Because this is the question: is what's motivating this move? So I want to maybe a small bit of pushback on something you said there, Lance, where you said like he can't redefine this. Like, I mean, this is sort of the problem with philosophy is that you can because everything's up for grabs, right? But the question is this well motivated or poorly motivated? And it seems like very poorly motivated. Like it's motivated purely by.
Yeah, I think Lance would agree with you, though.
Yeah, I completely agree. What he's doing here is terminological gerrymandering. By the way, Hume and everybody else is using the terms, not everybody else, but almost everybody else. He is an anti-realist. If he wants to say, yeah, but if I gerrymander the definition, I'm not. Sure. But I could do that with literally anything. I could be a theist in 5 seconds. My phone is a god. I define my phone as God. I'm a theist now. I mean, anybody could do this. The question, he's trying to make a terminological move here to avoid a label. And that's a ridiculous move to make. It's so objectionable. And this is all buried in some conversation where it's like, are people commonly aware of this fact that like he's just straight up an anti-realist?
Well, no, I don't think that's very commonly sort of like pointed out. Though I will say, I also don't think it's going to save him from what he cares about here, right? Because he's like, well, I don't want people to say it's arbitrary, right? It seems like his concern, or I wouldn't want people to be able to say that or something, and so I'm going to have a definition that excludes that. The problem is you have to still ask, even if you make this move. Well, what is it that makes God act on behalf of his values to command a particular thing, right? And I think for Craig, there's still going to be some kind of account of libertarian free will here. And so there's going to be some kind of brute contingency. And so you can flesh out that brute contingency as being arbitrary in the same way. He can redefine words again to say, well, it's not, he can still, and this is where it becomes an, interminable dispute sort of thing. But I still don't think he's sort of saving himself by doing this.
Also, it's sort of weird. I mean, you might think that God's nature, that's necessarily a certain way. First of all, that seems sort of weird to say. And second of all, that is necessarily this way rather than another way. In some ways, seems kind of arbitrary. But that's how.
Why is God's value? Why are God's values what they are?
That's the kind of the renewed Euthyphro, right? That people post to Craig. But we're almost done with this clip. So
I think what he's saying there is something along the lines of. That God, if God decided that torturing puppies for fun is good, then it would be good, and therefore, like it's just arbitrary. Danny, if you
where did you get that? I'm saying that because you've lost the plot, Mr. Wood, right, or Dr. Wood. I'm sorry, right? You've lost the plot. You were saying that I'm abusing.
It's Dr. Sharpwood, I think.
Okay. You're saying that I'm abusing the terms subjective when I'm applying it to. Think this version of divine command theory, right? And I provided you a case where there's another philosopher, a reputable one, at least by most people's measures in the field, that sort of agrees with me, right? So I'm not talking at my ass, right? I'm not like pulling this up from thin air. There's a concern out there in the literature that you're ignorant of that does divine command theory reduce to a kind of subjectivist view. Okay, you were just ignorant of it, and then you reinterpreted what I said to get out of the problem, which is that you're ignorant of the literature.
Philosophy, you should know how stupid you sound right now, and if you don't know how stupid you are right now, we can only attribute this to your atheism.
Danny, I just have one question to you: is God, in this case, in the same way a subject as you would be a subject in a typical subjective moral worldview?
Okay, so just in mind. Yeah, go ahead, Nathan. Go ahead.
This interaction in particular really frustrated me because both, I paid them about £12 in super chats to try and raise to their attention that you were there willing to discuss. And you were there and they obviously know you're there because they have your comment on screen, right? And they say these sorts of statements like, I would love to hear you explain. How can it be true that you would love to hear him explain it when you are laughing about not letting him up? You're saying you won't let him up. When he's asking to come up, I'm asking for him to come up and he won't come up, right? What? There is no sense in which you would love to hear him explain this. It's just rhetorical nonsense, right? And it really frustrated me that they're kind of like sat there like, haha, you can't reply, but here's why you're an idiot. And, at least now there's the opportunity to answer that question, right?
Yeah, I think it was you, me, and Friction in the chat. Lance, this is the first time you're hearing this crap, right? Am I correct?
No, I listened to this earlier.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. All right. So now I want everybody be reminded what AP just asked me. He asked me, basically, are you the same kind of subject as God? Okay. Now I answer, and let's see. I'm going to pause it. I'm going to ask chat. Did I answer the question? We should do a poll, right? Let's repeat the question in case, there's some Jay Dyer. There's some Dyerites in the chat. They're a little bit slow. They probably forgot because they have goldfish memory. So I'm going to listen to AP's question again.
Realm of moral philosophy. You should know how stupid you sound right now. And if you don't know how stupid you are right now, we can only attribute this to your atheism.
Danny, I just have one question to you. Is God, in this case, in the same way a subject as you would be a subject in a typical subjective moral worldview?
Yeah. So am I the same kind of subject? He uses the term way, same thing, right? Now, let's see how I respond.
Tell me.
Because I respond very promptly.
Even if you're going to argue that you could make the point that divine command theory is a subjectivist view, is, in that case, the subjectivism here the same as the subjectivism in the regular sense that we were talking about, and in the discussion that you were having with those two Christians? Please tell me that answer in all clear honesty. Please tell me.
What was that? Was that Nathan?
Yeah, just how he's responded there. If you just go back a tiny, maybe like 5 seconds.
I'll go. Okay.
Because he seems to have even said it is subjectivism. It's just special subjectivism, right?
He said that even if you were right, he granted it.
Okay.
Even if you were right.
Hypothetically, yeah. But even in that hypothetical, right? It still is. This is what I mean about it's like, even if you're right, is it subjectivism or is it special subjectivism? Why is that a relevant distinction to make? Like,
yeah, it might be a different. Like, you can have different subjectivist views, so it might be a different than, say, some standard attributor or agent relativism or something like that. So okay, but that doesn't undermine the claim that it's a subjectivist theory. So, like, why would that be relevant here?
Okay.
With those two Christians, please tell me that answer in all clear honesty.
So let's see how I answer.
Please tell me this. Answer me this very simple question. Is it the same subject?
And I also want everybody to notice. Notice how long my comment has been up there. That'll matter later. Keep that in mind.
Is it the same kind of subject? Is it the same kind of subjectivism? Please answer this question. Do you think that's
I don't know why you're interacting with it. There comes a point where you're like, this is too stupid. Why are you interacting?
You think that's sufficient as a question? You want to answer?
I gave up after he said this. I'm not interested in it.
Please answer to me very, very honestly. Is it the same type of subjective? Is it the same kind of subject? Is it categorically the same? Please tell me. Come on. Please tell me. Please tell me.
It's about to come up.
Please tell me. All I need is a very, very short yes, it is the same, or it is not the same. Go ahead, please. Come on. You don't need to type out a long.
Hey, look, Digital Gnosis said, stop talking. What did he say? Yeah. Stop insulting him whilst not letting him in, you bully idiot. Why are you using the word idiot? Don't you know that's a word that actually referred to a person with a certain level of
gnosis? You sound very radical.
Yeah, how dare you? And what are you going to do? You're going to start dropping the R bombs on us and stuff? Come on, you're going to start dropping the R slurs? You're dropping the I slur on us? You bigot?
Okay, the context of this is that in the Piers Morgan video that they were reviewing, Piers ambushed Parker and I on whether we could use the R slur. That's where this is coming from. So just for people that don't have any context.
Just to unpack my view a little bit on slurs, and not to go too much off the rails, but I actually do think that slurs and power and even, violence have their place in, like self-defense situations and things. So, the point is that just because I don't think people should be using slurs like the R word or the N word or whatever, willy-nilly just to hurt people for no reason, doesn't mean that, I don't think that there's any place for any kind of slurs, say, particularly if someone is a nasty bully and it can delegitimize their views or make their views seem less appealing.
Phil talk. So you refused to answer my question.
Okay, so here was my answer. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's a divine subject or a dog subject or a human one. They're all subjects. Humans, dogs, angels, gods are different types of subjects. So that means God and humans are different. That's an answer to the question, right?
I ask you one more time, one more final time. Is it the same kind of subject?
It's it's in there.
That's a comprehension issue, right, on his part. Because,
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that they can be different. Whichever way you answer, the answer is that they're subjects, and that's the relevant point, right? So, you know, your answer can be yes or no, and it's the same. It has the same relevance for the argument that they're purportedly addressing.
Is it categorically the same kind of subjectivism or subject that we are talking about, and that you were very, very clearly talking about in this discussion that you were having with those Christians? Please answer my question. One final chance.
So I answer a second time.
Is it the same kind of subjective? Is it the same kind of subject? Please answer my question. I'm really curious. I just said they were different types.
Okay, so here's my answer. I just said they were different types of subjects. Can you not read? But they're all subjects. Holy moly. Now, can you not, when he reads the can you not read, he realized, I think that, oh yeah, he did say that. And look how fast he takes down the comment, right? Like, it's hilarious.
Types of subjects. Wonderful. Good. Thank you. You are an idiot. You are an absolute imbecile. And
How?
yet you were acting in that discussion.
Why are you wrong? Like, so you answered his question. You articulated why you don't think that answer undermines the argument that you're making and why the argument still goes through. And he goes, and even, you know, he's saying, oh, I would love for you to answer me. You do his request, you answer it. He doesn't rebut your argument, and then he calls you an idiot for doing what he wants. This is just pathetic.
Yeah. Also, if you had said, like, you're agreeing with what his own conclusion is, so why would that make you an idiot?
Yeah.
Right. I don't have enough faith.
What the hell? Yeah, they're different subjects. Doesn't he think so? So why is saying, yeah, they're different subjects, they're different kinds of subjects? Why is that a stupid response? Why does that make you an idiot?
Chance.
No,
Answer my question. Is it the same kind of subjective? Is it the same kind of subject? Please answer my question. I'm really curious. I just said they were different types of subjects. Wonderful. Good. Thank you. You are an idiot. You are an absolute imbecile. And yet you were acting in that discussion as if they were the same kind of subject.
No, you weren't. No, you weren't. When did you say they are exactly the same kind of subjects? Gods and human beings are identical in all their other characteristics aside from being subjects. You never said anything like that. You never implied anything like that. He imagines something ridiculous in his head and is attributing this to you. This is projection.
He explicitly said it doesn't matter either way. Like, he literally said that, right? And I think though that it's the abuse dynamics that are frustrating to me, because they create this kind of like Kafka trap where it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't answer, you're running away. If you do answer, oh, you're an idiot. That shows what an idiot you are because you fell into my. It's just so frustrating, and they're not playing the game of reasoned discourse.
Right. I actually think that there's a good reason for. I think they're rational not bringing me up because I would humiliate them. In fact, anybody can humiliate these two. They can't reason out of a bag, and they don't know the literature. They know that, right? So they protect themselves, right? It's perfectly rational, preserve their platform, and not talking to people like us. Do you want to say something, Lance?
Yeah, just the Kafka trap thing. What could you have said where they wouldn't have responded with "you're an idiot"? Other than for you to immediately convert on the spot, and then they wouldn't believe you and they call you an idiot and call you a troll. No, there's nothing you could have said. No, there's nothing you could have said. And how are you supposed to engage with people where if you said, no, they're not different subjects. Yes, they are different kinds of subjects. Or if you said anything other than those two things. So yes, no, or any other answer, they're all going to result in the same conclusion. They've decided on how to judge you, how to treat you, and how to talk about you, regardless of what you say to them.
Exactly. Now, this is it from my clips. I don't know, Nathan, if you had any more, but I'm good.
Yeah, I think that overlaps, to be honest, with the ones that I wanted to go over as well. So yeah, I'm good there as well.
Perfect. I think we don't want to make this go 5 hours long, although, and we invite Lance and Detroit. What happened was I always say, hey, Nathan, we got to do something about this because we were talking to these two in chat. And we wanted to invite Lance and Detroit. So if y'all have to leave, that's great. But are there any Dyerites, anybody that thinks that these two are right about anything, or that are there any ops in the chat that want to come up, in other words, to challenge our assessment?
Put the join link there if people want.
But I don't want to keep. I mean,
feel free to leave if you want.
If we need to leave, we need to leave. But I'm just curious. I mean, this is bottom of the barrel.
But to be fair as well to people, of course, because there's 4 of us, and it might feel very intimidating to want to come up or whatever. I mean, the advice would be obviously just don't be particularly aggressive. And
you can choose who you want to talk to. If you come up, you can choose who you want to talk to, right? Detroiter is probably the easy one to go for. So just pick them. If you're worried about losing, just pick Detroiter.
And also just that we're all very open to having conversations with people at different points. Like we're accessible in like Discord or through like email, TikTok, but places like that. So if people do want to talk to us some other time, they are more than welcome to do so as well.
And I invited these people. But I want to point out, I don't think anyone's going to request, because all Jay Dyer fans do, and these other people that follow these dipshit apologists, right, is they ankle bite from the comments. Okay. They have nothing substantive to say, right? The best they can do is talk about people's looks, voices, sexuality. That's all they can do, right? That's all they can do. That's all you are, right? You live in the chat and you can't branch out because you don't got the cojones. All right.
That's a big fat juicy worm, but no one is taking it.
Well, they know where to find us. They know how to contact us. They know how to get in touch if someone wants to challenge our interpretation and our critiques.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. Feel free to, I guess we could end right here. Feel free to email any of us, DM any of us. We'll talk with you. Unlike the gods that you worship, Dyer, Jim Bob, these others, right? They're cowards, right? The people that you follow are cowards. We'll talk to anyone.
I will say, Jim Bob will talk to people at least, but he's got his own problems.
Whether or not Jim Bob, that was unfair to Jim Bob. It's really just the apostate prophet, David Wood, Dyer, Inspiring Philosophy. These people are cowards. Jim Bob, I actually agree with you. I threw Jim Bob when I should have. They're all the same.
Would you include Wilson in there too?
It's like 5 persons in one being. Like it's just Anyways.
Well, he will talk to people. He just won't make any sense what he does. But I've put all the links to all your channels in the description for people as well, just to remember. Danny Phil Talk, Friction, Lance Independent, all in the description. Go and check out their channels, subscribe. Their contact information stuff is there for people too.
And I have 71 people watching on my channel. You should go follow Detroiter, Lance, and Nathan. I've learned from these 3. I think all these 3 are smarter than me. Of course, they wouldn't say that, but I really do. I've learned from these people. If you want to be like me, awesome, right? You should follow the ultimate source of where I came from. I learned from these people, so you should follow their channels. Absolutely, for the people that are listening on mine.
Yeah, I've got 48 people watching. You should go subscribe to every other channel on here. I'll put a link to the description of all of them in my video as well.
Great, cool.
Detroit, you have like 2 people watching you. What's going on?
I didn't restream it, but I did.
But to be fair, right, I will say of all of us, Detroit has probably the best philosophical interviews because he's had all the big names in philosophy on, right? So
right. You do have a one-of-a-kind channel. Mine is just another unhinged counter-apologist atheist channel. So
I will say Detroiter has some of the best interviews because he's able to substantively engage with the people on there. A lot of interviews are good, but the interview is just like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And that could be great, but you actually have a back and forth. It's amazing. So, and I'm not just trying to sell your channel for fun. Like I listen to the channel.
Yeah, you interview professional philosophers, and then from what I've understood, you actually read their shit before you interview them. Yeah, so that way you can actually be a competent person in interviewing them, which is impressive. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Who was that person that joined?
Some person called JJ or JG, but then randomly dropped out. I don't know.
All right. Cool. All right. I'm gonna head out. Right. Bye, everyone. Okay.
Cool.
All right. That's something to do.
Thanks for your time. Bye.
Au revoir.